Night settles over the countryside long before your journey truly ends. The last glow of daylight fades behind distant hills. Smoke rises gently from scattered cottages, and somewhere beyond the fields, a church bell marks an hour that few people bother to count precisely. In the Middle Ages, time often belonged more to the changing sky than to any clock. For most people, tomorrow would arrive much like today had done, with familiar work, familiar faces, and familiar roads. But for a handful of ordinary men and women, tomorrow would begin somewhere else entirely. Welcome to Sleepy Historian, where tonight we leave behind kings seated upon carved thrones and knights riding into famous battles. Instead, we follow someone whose footsteps quietly connected villages, castles, monasteries, bustling towns, and distant courts. Their name was rarely written into history, yet without them, much of medieval life would have slowed almost to a standstill. Before we begin our long walk together, make yourself comfortable. If you are already lying beneath a warm blanket, allow your shoulders to soften. Let your breathing become slow than it was a few moments ago. There is nowhere you need to hurry. The roads we travel tonight have waited for centuries, and they are in no rush to tell their stories. If you find these quiet journeys through history relaxing, you might consider subscribing so that another peaceful exploration is waiting whenever you wish to return. Many listeners drift to sleep before the journey is over, while others discover a new detail each time they listen again. However far you travel tonight is entirely enough. Most people imagine medieval messages racing across kingdoms on magnificent horses, carried by royal couriers dressed in colorful cloaks bearing noble seals. It is an image encouraged by stories, paintings, and films. Yet the truth was usually much quieter. The overwhelming majority of messages traveled through the hands of ordinary people who owned neither impressive horses nor shining armor. Many walked for days beneath uncertain skies. Others borrowed tired animals only when absolutely necessary. Their clothing was practical rather than grand, their equipment simple, and their greatest talent was often not speed, but reliability. That may be the first surprising truth waiting beside tonight's road. The medieval world was connected not by constant movement, but by patient endurance. Information crossed rivers only as quickly as ferries allowed. Letters paused when storms flooded roads. News rested overnight beside monastery fires because darkness made further travel unwise. Entire villages might wait weeks to learn events that today would arrive in moments. You are about to discover what it meant to live inside that slower rhythm. Imagine waking before dawn, long before the first smoke curls upward from cottage chimneys. The air is cool enough that each breath becomes briefly visible. Dew settles upon rough grass, soaking the edges of worn boots before the journey has truly begun. Somewhere nearby, a rooster calls into the darkness, answered by another farther away, each unaware that the day ahead will carry one traveler much farther than everyone else. You are not leaving to seek adventure. You are leaving because someone is waiting. Perhaps a merchant several villages away expects confirmation that wool has been purchased. Perhaps a monastery awaits copied manuscripts promised many weeks earlier. Perhaps a local lord requires news from neighboring lands before making an important decision. Maybe a family simply hopes that relatives living beyond the next valley are still alive after a difficult winter. The reason matters deeply to those who wait, even if it seems ordinary to everyone else. That quiet responsibility rests with you. Unlike soldiers, you are not expected to conquer anyone. Unlike priests, you are not expected to guide souls. Unlike merchants, you are not expected to bargain over prices. Your duty is strangely simple and surprisingly difficult. You must arrive. You must remember. You must deliver exactly what was entrusted to you. Nothing more, nothing less. In a world where very few people traveled great distances during ordinary life, the messenger became something unusual. You carried not only letters sealed with wax but also spoken words, careful instructions, private agreements, and memories that could not safely be written at all. Some messages existed only inside your mind, repeated silently with every mile so that not a single important phrase would disappear before reaching its destination. That constant act of remembering shaped the rhythm of each journey. As your feet found their steady pace upon uneven roads, your thoughts often circled the same sentences again and again. Names, places, promises, dates tied to church festivals rather than numbered calendars, directions explained through familiar landmarks instead of drawn maps. A large oak beside the river, a weathered stone cross at the edge of the forest, the mill where the water turned east instead of south. These became your guideposts in a landscape that changed gently with every passing season. And although history often celebrates dramatic moments crowning ceremonies, famous battles, or grand discoveries, most medieval messengers experienced something far quieter. Their lives were measured not by moments of glory, but by thousands upon thousands of patient steps, each one carrying the weight of another person's hopes a little farther down the road. The journey we begin tonight will unfold at that same unhurried pace. As the miles slowly gather beneath your boots, you begin to understand that a medieval messenger lived inside two different worlds at once. One was the place you happened to stand at any given moment, a narrow woodland path scattered with fallen leaves, a muddy lane bordered by damp hedges, or a lively market square filled with voices rising and falling like birdsong. The other world was always somewhere ahead, waiting beyond the next hill, the next river crossing, or the next day's walk. Your thoughts were rarely allowed to remain entirely where your feet happened to be. There was comfort in movement, even when it was exhausting. Each morning began with familiar rituals that asked very little imagination, but demanded steady attention. You checked the ties of your leather pouch before setting out. You adjusted your cloak according to the weather rather than according to appearance. If you carried a written letter, you felt for its reassuring weight almost without thinking. If the message lived only in memory, you quietly repeated it before leaving, speaking softly enough that only you could hear. The words became companions. Sometimes they stayed with you for only a few hours before reaching their destination. Other times they remained for several days, carried across valleys, forests, and rivers, until they felt as familiar as a prayer spoken every evening. You learned not to change a phrase simply because another sounded more elegant. The smallest difference could alter an agreement, confuse an instruction, or leave two distant communities misunderstanding one another for months. That responsibility did not announce itself with loud fanfare. It settled gently upon your shoulders, much like the weight of your cloak after an early morning rain. You also learned that patience was not simply a virtue in the medieval world. It was a necessity. Roads disappeared beneath thick mud after days of rain. Rivers swelled beyond their usual banks, forcing travelers to wait until the current calmed. Winter frost hardened the ground enough to ease walking in some places, while making steep paths unexpectedly dangerous in others. Even the brightest summer afternoon could fade sooner than expected beneath gathering clouds. The road always expected you to adapt. Unlike modern travelers, he could not send word explaining that you would arrive tomorrow instead of today. There were no quick assurances carried ahead of you. If weather delayed your progress, the people waiting simply continued waiting. Perhaps they wondered whether you had taken another route. Perhaps they assumed a broken bridge had slowed your pace. Or perhaps, after enough time had passed, they quietly feared that you would never appear at all. It is easy to imagine medieval communication as fragile because it depended upon individuals rather than machines. Yet it was remarkably resilient in another way. Communities understood delay because everyone shared the same uncertain landscape. They knew rivers flooded. They knew snow-blocked mountain passes. They knew illness could leave even the strongest traveler resting for several days inside a monastery or humble roadside inn. The journey belonged as much to the land as it did to the messenger. As we continue together tonight, you will slowly come to know that landscape not through maps or royal chronicles, but through ordinary experience. You will feel the gradual ache that settles into tired legs after many hours of steady walking. You will notice how your senses become unusually attentive to distant church bells, barking dogs, or the faint smell of wood smoke drifting across damp fields. You will begin to judge the passing hours by the changing angle of sunlight instead of by numbered hours on a clock. You will discover that even silence has different qualities. The silence of an open meadow is wide and gentle, broken only by wind brushing through long grasses. The silence beneath dense woodland feels closer, interrupted by unseen birds and the occasional crack of a branch somewhere beyond your sight. The silence inside a sleeping village before dawn carries another character entirely, filled with quiet expectation, as though every shuttered window is patiently waiting for the day to begin. A messenger learns to recognize them all. Perhaps that is why so many journeys were remembered less through dramatic events than through countless small observations. The familiar inn whose chimney could be seen long before the building itself, the stone bridge that always echoed beneath wooden cartwheels, the ancient oak where travelers often paused to rest, not because anyone had instructed them to do so, but because generations before had discovered the same welcome patch of shade. These places became markers in both memory and routine. Over months and years, the road itself began to feel almost alive, not because it changed quickly, but because you changed while walking it. The first journey filled you with uncertainty. The 10th brought quiet confidence. By the 100th, your feet often found familiar paths before your thoughts consciously recognized them. Even so, every message remained important. Every departure asked for the same careful preparation. Every arrival depended upon the same steady endurance. History often remembers the people who made decisions. Tonight we will spend our time with those who carried those decisions across the countryside, one patient step after another. We will walk through changing seasons, rest beside modest fires, shelter from rain beneath monastery roofs, and discover how a person with little wealth and almost no public recognition could quietly become one of the threads holding medieval society together. So as the stars begin appearing above the darkening fields and the road stretches calmly into the distance, imagine yourself tightening the strap of a weathered leather satchel one final time. Ahead lies another village, beyond that another valley, then another road, and somewhere beyond the next horizon. Someone is already waiting, trusting that before many days have passed, they will hear the sound of measured footsteps approaching, with news carried carefully across the sleeping countryside. The first lesson of becoming a medieval messenger is not how to walk farther than anyone else. It is how to become someone whom other people believe, long before a leather satchel is placed into your hands, or a sealed letter is entrusted to your care. Your reputation begins quietly growing inside the community where you live. It is built through ordinary days rather than remarkable ones. People notice that you arrive when you say you will. They notice that borrowed tools are returned. They remember that conversations spoken in confidence remain private. In a world where written records are limited and strangers are uncommon, trust travels from person to person long before any message does. You do not suddenly become reliable. You spend years becoming known as reliable. Imagine yourself living in a modest village surrounded by fields that change color with each season. The people here know your parents, your neighbors, and perhaps even your grandparents. They remember you carrying water as a child, helping during harvest, repairing fences after winter storms, and attending church on feast days. Your life is visible because almost everyone's life is visible. There are very few anonymous faces. That closeness can sometimes feel comforting. At other times it feels impossible to escape. Every mistake is remembered. Every kindness is noticed. Every promise either strengthens or weakens the quiet confidence others place in you. Without realizing it, you have already been preparing for this work. Many medieval occupations passed from one generation to the next, but becoming a messenger did not always require a family tradition. More often it required something less tangible. Someone older simply decided that you could be trusted with responsibility. A village reeve, a merchant, a monastery official, or a local lord might begin by asking you to carry a simple spoken message to the next settlement. Nothing important, perhaps. Only a reminder about a coming market. A request for extra grain. News that a relative would arrive after sunset. The journey itself is short, but everyone watches what happens afterward. Did you remember every detail? Did you return when expected? Did you become distracted along the way? Did you repeat words exactly as they had been given? Success is measured quietly. No celebration follows. Instead, another task arrives a few weeks later, then another. Little by little, confidence grows, not only in the minds of those sending messages, but also within yourself. Before long, you begin noticing things that others overlook. You learn that roads are never truly identical from one season to the next. A familiar path becomes difficult after heavy rain. A stream that barely wets your boots in summer may become impossible to cross during spring thaw. A fallen tree can force travelers onto unfamiliar tracks where every turn demands greater attention. The countryside becomes something to study rather than merely pass through. While many villagers spend their lives working the same fields year after year, your world slowly stretches beyond the horizon. The neighboring village no longer feels distant. The market town becomes familiar enough that you recognize individual shopkeepers. The monastery bells ringing across the valley tell you roughly how much daylight remains. You begin measuring distance differently, not in miles, not in hours, but in experience. One hill beyond the old mill, 2 streams after the shepherd's pasture, half a day from the stone bridge. These landmarks settle into your memory more naturally than numbers ever could. Maps, where they exist at all, are uncommon and often inaccurate for everyday travel. Most people rely instead upon memory shared through conversation. An older traveler explains that you should turn where the ash tree leans toward the road. Another warns that the western track floods after several days of rain. Someone else reminds you that a certain farmhouse keeps a friendly dog that barks loudly but rarely approaches strangers. Knowledge moves from voice to voice. You become part of that quiet tradition. There is another skill that surprises modern minds. Many messages are never written down. Parchment is valuable. Ink takes time to prepare. Not everyone can read. Even among those who can, spoken communication often remains faster and more practical for ordinary matters. This means that part of your work is not carrying paper, but carrying memory. At first that seems daunting. A sentence spoken once can easily blur with another before the day is over. Yet experienced messengers develop gentle habits to guard against forgetting. As soon as they leave the person sending the message, they quietly repeat every word several times beneath their breath. They match names with familiar faces already stored in memory. They imagine the person who will receive the message and mentally rehearse the moment of its delivery. The words settle into place like carefully stacked stones. Hours later, as your boots continue their steady rhythm along winding paths, you find yourself repeating those same phrases again, not because you fear forgetting them immediately, but because careful repetition becomes as natural as breathing. Soon it no longer feels like extra work. It simply becomes part of walking. The road teaches its lessons gently, and you begin to understand that carrying information is not merely about reaching another place. It is about preserving another person's exact meaning across every mile that lies between departure and arrival. As the days become weeks and the weeks quietly gather into months, you begin to notice a subtle change in the way people greet you. It is not dramatic enough to be spoken aloud, nor important enough to be celebrated. Instead, it reveals itself in small moments that might easily pass unnoticed by someone standing nearby. A merchant who once handed messages to an older courier now places them directly into your care. The steward of a nearby manor no longer repeats every instruction twice, trusting that you have listened carefully the first time. A village elder, whose voice has grown softer with age, speaks with the confidence that every word will arrive exactly as intended. These quiet gestures mean more than praise. They are signs that your reputation has begun traveling ahead of you. Long before your boots appear on a familiar road, people may already know that someone dependable is coming, not because your name carries great importance, but because reliability has a way of spreading through conversation. One traveler mentions your careful work to another. A monk remembers that a letter reached its destination despite several days of heavy rain. A merchant recalls that you waited patiently until every instruction had been fully explained before beginning your journey. Trust grows slowly. It almost never arrives all at once. You discover that this trust must be protected just as carefully as the messages themselves. There will be moments when curiosity tempts others. At a crowded inn, someone sitting beside the fire may casually ask where you have come from or where you intend to go next. The questions sound harmless enough. Travelers naturally exchange stories to pass the evening, and there is comfort in conversation after a long day on the road. Still, experience teaches restraint. You answer politely without revealing more than necessary. You mention the weather rather than the contents of your satchel. You speak about muddy roads instead of important destinations. You discuss the quality of the evening meal rather than the people waiting for your arrival tomorrow. Most listeners ask no further questions. Those who continue asking quietly remind you why careful silence matters. Not every message concerns kings or great lords. In truth, most never will. Many carry the ordinary concerns of everyday medieval life. A miller may need to inform another village that a broken wheel has delayed the grinding of grain. A monastery might request fresh supplies of parchment before winter closes nearby roads. A blacksmith may send word that repaired tools are ready for collection. Parents sometimes ask distant relatives about an upcoming marriage, while merchants exchange prices before deciding whether a long journey to market is worthwhile. To the wider world, these messages appear small. To the people waiting for them, they are often deeply important. You gradually realize that history is not sustained only by grand events. It is sustained by ordinary people continuing their ordinary responsibilities. The messenger stands quietly among them. Because you travel more than many of your neighbors, your understanding of the surrounding countryside slowly becomes broader. You begin recognizing subtle differences between communities. One village wakes unusually early because nearby fields require long hours of labor before the heat of summer arrives. Another is known for its skilled weavers, whose looms produce a steady rhythm that can be heard even from the road. In one monastery, the evening bell rings slightly earlier than elsewhere. At another, guests are always offered warm broth before being shown a place to sleep. These details are never written into official records. They become part of your own quiet map of the world. The roads themselves begin to feel familiar companions rather than uncertain obstacles. You remember where the ground remains damp long after rainfall has ended. You know which stretches offer welcome shade during midsummer afternoons, and which hills seem to catch every cold winter wind. You no longer think carefully about every turning. Your feet often choose the correct path before your thoughts have caught up. Yet familiarity never becomes carelessness. Each journey asks for the same attention as the first. A loose bootlace ignored in the morning may become a painful inconvenience before noon. A forgotten water skin may leave the afternoon unnecessarily difficult. A message repeated carelessly may lose a single word that changes its meaning more than anyone expects. The smallest details often deserve the greatest care. Perhaps this is why experienced messengers are remembered not for dramatic acts of bravery, but for remarkable consistency. They do the same careful things day after day, season after season. They prepare before sunrise. They listen more than they speak. They walk steadily instead of quickly. They rest when the light begins to fade, knowing that exhaustion causes mistakes more readily than patience ever does. There is wisdom in accepting human limits. The road is always longer than pride believes it to be. As you continue imagining yourself in this quiet profession, another realization slowly settles into place. Although you carry other people's words, you also carry a small measure of their trust, their expectations, and sometimes even their worries. A folded letter sealed with wax may represent months of careful planning. A spoken promise may determine whether two families remain friends or drift apart. A simple request for supplies could mean the difference between comfort and hardship during the coming winter. The weight inside your satchel is often slight. The meaning inside it is not. You are beginning to understand why medieval communities valued dependable messengers so highly. They did not expect perfection nor impossible speed. They expected honesty, patience, careful memory, and the willingness to keep walking when another hill appeared beyond the last one. These qualities cannot be purchased. They cannot be borrowed. They are earned one quiet journey at a time. And as dawn gradually brightens another morning sky above fields still silver with dew, you tighten a strap across your shoulder once again, draw a slow breath of cool country air, and step onto the waiting road with a little more confidence than yesterday, knowing that somewhere ahead another person has already placed their faith in your steady footsteps. The day of a medieval messenger rarely begins with the sunrise. More often it begins while the world is still wrapped in darkness. Long before the first faint color appears along the eastern horizon, you awaken to a silence that feels almost complete. The fire that warmed the room during the evening has settled into glowing embers. The air inside your modest home is noticeably cooler than it was before sleep. Outside, the village remains quiet, its narrow lanes empty except for the occasional animal stirring in a nearby stable. There is no bell announcing that it is time to leave. No clock marks the exact hour. Instead, your body gradually learns to wake before dawn, guided by habit as much as necessity. The distance ahead is often uncertain, and every extra moment of daylight is valuable. Once the sun disappears in the evening, continuing the journey becomes increasingly difficult. Roads lose their familiar shape, landmarks disappear into shadow, and even a well-known path can become unfamiliar beneath a moon hidden by clouds. So you rise while others continue sleeping. The first movements of the morning are slow and deliberate. After many journeys, you understand that haste at the beginning often creates inconvenience before midday. You sit quietly for a moment. Allow your thoughts to gather before your feet touch the cold floor. There is comfort in this familiar routine, repeated so many times that it asks almost no effort to remember. The room smells faintly of smoke from last night's fire, mixed with the earthy scent of wool, leather, and timber that has absorbed years of changing seasons. Somewhere outside you hear the soft shifting of livestock. A horse stamps gently inside its shelter. Chickens murmur without yet beginning their morning chorus. The village itself still seems undecided about whether night has truly ended. You begin dressing carefully. Your clothing is chosen for endurance rather than appearance. A linen shirt rests closest to your skin, offering modest comfort through long hours of walking. Over it comes a sturdy wool tunic, thick enough to hold warmth during chilly mornings but loose enough to allow easy movement. Depending upon the season, another woolen layer may follow, especially when frost lingers across the fields. The cloak deserves particular attention. To someone unfamiliar with medieval travel, it may appear to be only another piece of clothing. Yet during long journeys it becomes almost another companion. It shields your shoulders from rain, blocks cold winds crossing open hillsides, provides warmth during unexpected delays, and sometimes even serves as a blanket when sleeping in places where comfort is limited. Before fastening it, you inspect the fabric. A loose fastening might seem unimportant while standing indoors, but after hours of walking against a steady wind, a small weakness becomes impossible to ignore. Your boots require equal care. They are among your most valuable possessions, not because they are beautiful, but because every mile depends upon them. The leather bears the marks of many previous journeys. Creases have formed where your feet bend naturally while walking. Mud from earlier travels has been cleaned away as thoroughly as possible, yet faint stains remain, quietly recording roads crossed weeks or even months before. You run your fingers along the stitching. Any sign of wear deserves attention now rather than later. A torn boot many miles from shelter is more than an inconvenience. It allows moisture to enter, softens the leather, rubs against the skin, and gradually transforms a comfortable stride into an exhausting one. Medieval travelers understood that small problems rarely remain small if ignored. The same careful thinking extends to everything you carry. Your leather satchel is lifted from its place beside the wall and examined before anything is placed inside. The strap is checked for cracks. The stitching is pressed gently between your fingers. A messenger who loses a satchel loses far more than a useful piece of equipment. Inside it may rest letters, wax tablets, folded instructions, small tokens proving your identity, or simple objects entrusted to your care by someone who cannot make the journey themselves. Each item has its place. Nothing is packed carelessly. A sealed letter is tucked where it will remain dry if light rain begins unexpectedly. A wax tablet is wrapped so its smooth surface will not be scratched by other objects. Small cords used for fastening bundles are coiled neatly instead of being left tangled at the bottom of the bag. These actions are repeated so often that they almost become a quiet form of meditation. Your hands move with practiced confidence while your thoughts remain calm. There is no need to hurry. The road will still be waiting when you step outside, and it is always better to spend one extra minute preparing in warmth than to spend an hour regretting a forgotten item somewhere beyond the next distant hill. With your clothing settled comfortably and your satchel prepared, the morning still offers a few quiet moments before you step beyond the doorway. These moments may seem small, yet they often shape the entire day ahead. Medieval travel rewards those who think carefully before beginning, rather than those who try to solve every problem after the journey is already underway. A simple meal usually comes first. It is rarely elaborate. More often it consists of whatever remains from the previous evening. A coarse loaf of rye or barley bread sits upon the wooden table, its crust firm from yesterday's baking. A small piece of cheese provides welcome nourishment without requiring preparation. If fortune has been kind, there may also be a little smoked fish or cured meat, carefully preserved for journeys that demand extra strength. You eat slowly, not because there is abundant time, but because a hurried meal offers little comfort once you are many miles from home. Nearby, a clay cup holds cool water drawn from the village well before nightfall. In some seasons, warm ale is considered safer than uncertain water found farther along the road, and many travelers carry a small supply when they can. Whatever the drink, the purpose is the same: to begin the day with enough strength to carry you through several hours before another opportunity to rest presents itself. Outside, the darkness begins to soften. The stars remain visible overhead, yet the eastern sky has gained the faintest hint of silver. It is not enough light to reveal distant landmarks, but it is enough to remind you that dawn is approaching with quiet certainty. Before leaving, there is often one final conversation. The person sending you, whether a village reeve, a merchant, the steward of a manor, or the prior of a monastery, speaks with calm precision. Instructions are not repeated for ceremony. They are repeated because memory must be stronger than uncertainty. You stand without interruption. Listening is now more important than speaking. The letter is for the abbot alone. The merchant should receive payment before releasing the wool. If the bridge remains flooded, take the western road instead. Return before the next market if the weather allows. Each instruction is clear. Each carries its own importance. Sometimes you receive a sealed parchment, warm wax still bearing the unmistakable impression of a family crest or official seal. At other times, there is no written document at all. The sender lowers their voice and speaks words intended only for the ears of another person many miles away. Those spoken messages require even greater care. As the final sentence is finished, you quietly repeat it back, word for word. This simple habit allows any mistake to be corrected immediately, before the journey has begun. If you misunderstand a place name or forget a single detail, now is the safest time to discover it. Only after both of you are satisfied does the message truly become yours to carry. The responsibility passes almost invisibly. No ceremony marks the moment, yet you feel it all the same. Stepping outside, the cool morning air greets your face with surprising freshness. Dew clings to every blade of grass, and your first footsteps leave dark impressions upon the damp earth. Thin ribbons of mist rest low across nearby fields, softening fences, trees, and distant cottages, until they appear almost like faded paintings. The village still sleeps. Only a few windows show signs of life. A baker has already begun preparing the day's bread, and the faint aroma of warming ovens drifts gently through the quiet streets. Somewhere farther away, a blacksmith stirs the ashes inside his forge, knowing that work will begin soon after sunrise. A shepherd opens the gate of a small enclosure, allowing restless sheep to stretch their legs before the heat of the afternoon. Each person prepares for a different day. Yours simply begins earlier than most. As you pass familiar homes, you resist the temptation to hurry. The road ahead is long enough that an eager pace now may become an uncomfortable burden later. Experienced messengers understand that endurance is built from consistency rather than speed. Your stride settles into an easy rhythm. Your breathing follows naturally. The leather strap across your shoulders soon becomes a familiar weight rather than something you consciously notice. Beyond the final cottage, the village gives way to open countryside. Here the silence changes. Behind you lies the quiet stillness of sleeping homes. Ahead stretches the wider silence of fields, hedgerows, and distant woodland, broken only by birds greeting the coming day. Their songs grow gradually stronger as the eastern horizon brightens from silver to pale gold. The first rays of sunlight touch the tops of tall trees long before reaching the road beneath your feet. Everything seems to awaken slowly. A rabbit darts across the path before disappearing into thick grass. Tiny droplets of dew sparkle briefly before melting beneath the growing warmth. Smoke begins rising from scattered farmhouses across the valley, each thin column marking another household beginning its own ordinary morning. You continue walking. The road asks nothing of you except patience. Already your thoughts begin arranging the day ahead. You estimate how long it may take to reach the first village. You remember where a shallow stream offers fresh water during dry weather. You recall the old oak whose wide branches provide welcome shade around midday. None of these thoughts feels urgent. They simply become part of the quiet rhythm that accompanies every journey. There is comfort in knowing that careful preparation has left little to chance. Your boots fit well. Your cloak hangs securely. Your satchel rests comfortably against your side. The message remains safe. Whatever weather awaits beyond the next hill, whatever delays the road may quietly present, you have done everything possible before the journey began. Now there is only one task remaining: to place one foot before the other, then another, and another still. The countryside slowly opens before you, carrying with it the promise of many miles, unfamiliar conversations, changing skies, and the steady, dependable rhythm that has already begun to shape both your days and your life. By the time the sun has climbed fully above the eastern hills, the village where you spent the night has already slipped behind the gentle folds of the landscape. Its church tower is no longer visible. The voices that slowly filled its streets have faded into memory, replaced by quieter sounds that belong only to the countryside. The road stretches ahead with no concern for your destination. It has carried countless feet before yours. It will carry countless more after you are gone. Unlike the smooth roads many travelers know today, medieval roads are living things shaped almost entirely by weather, seasons, animals, and the endless passage of people. No single craftsman maintains every mile. No authority ensures that each path remains level or dry. Instead, the land itself decides how easy or how difficult the journey will become. 1 week, the road feels firm beneath your boots. The next, it seems determined to hold them in place. Spring is often the first great test. As winter slowly releases its grip, frozen ground softens beneath countless small streams of melting water. Cartwheels cut deep grooves into the earth, leaving narrow channels that harden and soften again with every passing day. What appears to be solid ground from a distance may suddenly yield beneath your weight, forcing you to step carefully from one patch of firmer earth to another. You quickly learn that watching the road several paces ahead is far wiser than watching only where your next foot will land. A single careless step can soak a boot before the morning is half finished. Wet feet are more than an inconvenience. They slowly rob you of comfort, then warmth, then energy. Experienced messengers know this well. They are not embarrassed to pause for a moment if it means finding a safer place to cross a muddy stretch. Saving a few minutes is rarely worth several hours of discomfort. Patience almost always proves the wiser companion. As the season advances, the countryside changes almost without announcing itself. Fresh green shoots emerge along the edges of fields. Birds become louder with each passing morning. Farmers return to their work with renewed determination, guiding wooden plows behind patient oxen, while children scatter seed across carefully prepared soil. You pass them quietly. Sometimes they pause to watch you, not because you are unusual, but because travelers are always small reminders that the wider world continues moving beyond the boundaries of a single village. A respectful greeting is exchanged, perhaps only a nod, perhaps a few simple words about the weather. There is seldom time for lengthy conversation, yet these brief encounters weave an invisible thread between communities. People remember familiar faces, even if they never learn every name. The road itself rarely follows a perfectly straight line. Instead, it bends gently around hills that would demand unnecessary climbing. It curves beside rivers that offer fresh water, but occasionally overflow their banks. It winds through woodland where ancient trees have stood longer than anyone living can remember. Each turn reveals another small piece of the landscape: a shepherd leading sheep toward fresh pasture, a woman gathering fallen branches for firewood, a pair of monks walking silently beneath heavy woolen habits, a merchant urging an overloaded cart through deep ruts while his horse strains patiently against the weight. Every traveler moves according to different needs, yet for a brief moment your paths become one. You notice that each person measures distance differently. The shepherd thinks only of the next hillside. The merchant worries about reaching tomorrow's market before sunset. The monks quietly count the hours until evening prayer. You, however, think in stages: the stone bridge before midday, the riverside inn before dusk, the monastery tomorrow morning. Breaking a long journey into smaller, familiar landmarks makes the road seem gentler, even when it remains physically demanding. Before long you hear something, almost before you see it. Water, a steady, patient current moving across smooth stones, somewhere beyond a stand of alder trees. The sound grows stronger with every step. Soon the river appears, wide enough to demand careful attention but calm enough to inspire quiet confidence. Not every crossing will be this welcoming. Some streams may be crossed simply by stepping from one stone to another. Others require sturdy wooden bridges that creak softly beneath the weight of travelers and wagons. Larger rivers often depend upon ferries operated by men who know every change in the current better than they know the roads leading away from it. Each crossing asks for its own kind of patience. You wait when waiting is wise. The river has no interest in your schedule. It follows only its own. Standing beside the water, you briefly loosen the strap across your shoulder, allowing tired muscles a moment of relief while watching sunlight shimmer across the gently moving surface. The pause is short, but welcome. Already you are beginning to understand that successful journeys are built not through relentless speed, but through countless thoughtful decisions made one quiet mile at a time. After the river has been crossed and the quiet splash of water fades behind you, the road begins to climb almost without warning. The slope is gentle enough that it never feels like a mountain, yet steady enough that each step asks a little more from your legs than the last. You shorten your stride without thinking. Years of walking have taught you that the easiest pace is rarely the fastest one. Breathing remains calm. Your shoulders stay relaxed. The hill is not an opponent to defeat. It is simply another part of the landscape that has always been there. From higher ground, the countryside reveals itself differently. Fields spread outward in irregular shapes, divided by hedgerows, stone walls, and narrow lanes that twist through the valleys like pale ribbons. Here and there, small clusters of cottages gather around a parish church, their thatched roofs blending naturally into the colors of the earth. Thin columns of smoke rise straight into the still morning air, telling you that the wind is gentle today. For a few moments you pause, not because you are exhausted, because this is one of the places where travelers naturally stop. Long before your own journeys began, countless others stood here for the same reason. Some adjusted the straps of heavy packs, others shared bread with companions. Merchants counted the wagons behind them. Pilgrims quietly admired the view before continuing toward shrines that still lay many days ahead. The road has a memory of its own. It remembers footsteps more faithfully than names. You drink a little water, careful not to empty your supply too early. Experience has taught you that another stream may appear within the hour, or perhaps not until late afternoon. The countryside offers generosity, but never according to a timetable. Looking ahead once more, you notice that the road begins to descend into woodland. The shade arrives gradually. First, a single ash tree stretches its branches across the path. Then an old beech joins it. Before long, the open sky has narrowed into patches of pale blue, visible between leaves that whisper gently whenever the breeze passes through them. The temperature changes almost immediately. The warmth of the open fields gives way to cool, damp air carrying the rich scent of moss, wet bark, and earth that has rested beneath generations of fallen leaves. The sunlight no longer reaches every part of the path. Instead, it arrives in scattered pools that drift slowly across the ground as branches move overhead. Inside the forest, sound behaves differently. Your footsteps become softer. Birdsong seems closer. The distant knock of a woodpecker echoes through the trees, while somewhere far away a crow calls once before, falling silent again. There is no reason for alarm. The woodland is alive, but not hostile. Still, you remain attentive. Roots cross the path where old trees have slowly claimed the soil beneath them. Small stones hide beneath carpets of leaves. Fallen branches occasionally force you to step around them rather than over them. None of these obstacles is dangerous on its own, yet together they remind you that carelessness often grows from familiarity. Even on roads you have traveled many times, the land continues changing. A storm may have weakened a tree. Heavy rain may have washed away part of the path. A farmer may have redirected a fence, creating a slight bend where none existed before. You learn never to assume that yesterday's road is exactly today's road. This quiet awareness becomes one of your greatest strengths. By midday, the forest begins to thin. Sunlight returns little by little, warming your cloak and drying the light moisture gathered from the cool woodland air. Ahead you hear another familiar sound, voices, not many. Perhaps 2 or 3 people speaking while repairing the edge of the road where recent wagon wheels have worn away the earth. One man lifts a shovel, another places stones into a deep rut, hoping to make the next traveler's passage a little easier. Their work will never truly be finished. Tomorrow another heavy cart may undo much of today's effort. The road demands constant attention because it is constantly being used. You exchange a greeting before continuing. There is comfort in these brief encounters. Although much of a messenger's life is spent alone, you are rarely isolated for long. The roads themselves create a quiet community of people, whose lives intersect for only a few moments before separating once again. A shepherd heading east passes a merchant traveling west. Pilgrims share a meal beside a stream before continuing toward distant shrines. Farmers wave from fields as familiar travelers make their steady progress along the lanes. You seldom stay long enough to know their stories, yet their presence reminds you that these roads belong to everyone. As afternoon slowly unfolds, the rhythm of walking settles even deeper into your body. Your boots rise and fall almost without conscious thought. The gentle swing of your satchel becomes as familiar as your own heartbeat. You begin noticing the passing hours not by watching the sun directly, but by observing how its light changes the landscape. Shadows beneath hedgerows shorten, then slowly lengthen once more. Birds grow quieter during the warmest part of the day. Even the breeze seems to pause before returning with renewed freshness later in the afternoon. Time reveals itself through countless small signs. You no longer feel the need to measure every mile. The road itself becomes your measure. One bend follows another. A weathered milestone stands half hidden beneath moss, its carved letters softened by centuries of rain. An ancient oak marks the place where 3 paths divide. A shallow stream crosses the lane, its clear water reflecting drifting clouds overhead. These landmarks become chapters in a story that never truly ends. Tomorrow another messenger will pass them. Next year another merchant. Generations from now, someone else will rest beneath the same broad branches, hearing the same birds, feeling the same breeze, and wondering how many travelers came before. As evening slowly begins its patient approach, you realize that the greatest lesson these roads have offered is neither speed nor endurance alone. It is consistency. The road never hurries, it simply continues. And little by little, with every steady footstep placed upon its worn surface, you begin to understand that your own life has started to resemble the path beneath your boots, quietly shaped by countless ordinary journeys, each one leading naturally into the next. By the time the afternoon begins to soften into evening, your thoughts gradually change. All day your attention has belonged to the road ahead. You have watched from muddy ground, listened to the sounds of distant rivers, and measured the passing hours by the movement of sunlight across fields and forests. But now another question quietly settles into your mind. Where will you sleep tonight? For many medieval travelers, the answer is never completely certain. You may have hoped to reach a familiar inn before darkness falls, yet a swollen stream, a slow ferry, or an unexpected detour through damaged roads can quietly steal an hour or 2 from the day. In summer, the long evenings offer little forgiveness. During winter, however, Daylight disappears so quickly that even experienced messengers learn not to depend too heavily on perfect timing. The wise traveler begins looking for shelter before it becomes absolutely necessary. As you continue walking, you notice subtle signs that another settlement may not be far away. Wagon tracks become more frequent beneath your feet. Thin wisps of smoke rise above distant trees. A flock of geese crosses overhead, their calls echoing across the cooling air. Soon the scent of burning wood reaches you long before the buildings themselves come into view. It is a comforting smell, not because it promises luxury, because it promises warmth. The village you approach is modest, much like dozens of others you have already visited. A handful of timber-framed cottages stand close together, their thatched roofs weathered by many seasons of rain and snow. Small vegetable gardens stretch behind low-woven fences, while chickens scratch patiently through the dusty ground, searching for their final meal of the day. Children still play near the village green, though their voices have become quieter as parents begin calling them indoors. Dogs lift their heads as you pass. Some bark once or twice before deciding you are no threat at all. Travelers are familiar enough here. You have learned that not every village offers lodging, and not every household welcomes strangers. Hospitality exists throughout the medieval world, but it is shaped by caution as much as kindness. Food is valuable. Firewood requires effort to gather. Every additional guest means another mouth to feed, and another place beside the fire to share. You never assume that shelter will simply appear. Instead, you ask politely. If there is an inn nearby, someone points you toward it. If not, they may mention a family known for accepting travelers in exchange for a few coins or a small favor. Occasionally, someone suggests continuing another mile or two toward a monastery, where visitors are often received with quiet generosity. The choice is not always yours. Sometimes the road decides. Tonight, fortune seems gentle. Near the edge of the village stands a modest inn, identified not by painted signs filled with colorful images, but by the familiar sounds surrounding it. Horses shift inside a nearby stable. Laughter escapes briefly through an open doorway before disappearing again. Warm light spills across the ground, stretching into the cool evening like an invitation. You pause outside for only a moment, not from uncertainty, from habit. Before entering any unfamiliar place, you instinctively adjust the strap of your satchel, making certain that everything entrusted to your care remains secure. Letters are checked without opening them. Wax seals remain untouched. Nothing has shifted during the day's long walk. Only then do you step inside. The warmth reaches you immediately. After hours spent beneath changing skies, the heat from the central hearth feels almost surprising. Smoke drifts lazily upward toward dark wooden beams blackened by countless fires over many decades. The room smells of roasted onions, coarse bread, damp wool drying beside the flames, and fresh straw recently carried in from the stable. None of it is elegant, yet after a long day's journey it feels welcoming. Several travelers already occupy rough wooden benches surrounding the fire. A merchant quietly counts small coins beneath the glow of a tallow candle. Two farmers discuss the coming harvest in slow, thoughtful voices. An elderly pilgrim massages weary feet before accepting a bowl of steaming broth from the innkeeper's wife. Nobody seems especially curious about your arrival. This is one of the quiet comforts of the road. In places where travelers regularly gather, another unfamiliar face attracts little attention. Everyone carries their own destination, their own worries, and their own plans for tomorrow's journey. You remove your cloak carefully, not because you are entirely at ease, because even while resting, a messenger remains responsible for what has been entrusted to them. The day's walking may be finished. Your duty is not. The innkeeper greets you with the practiced kindness of someone who has welcomed hundreds of weary travelers over many years. His questions are simple and familiar. Will you be staying the night? Do you require a meal? Is there a horse to stable? When you explain that you have arrived on foot, he nods without surprise. Not every messenger rides. Horses are costly to purchase and expensive to feed, and many short-distance couriers rely instead upon their own steady pace. A pair of dependable boots often serves them better than an animal requiring constant care. A few coins change hands. Nothing extravagant, only enough to earn a place near the fire, a simple meal, and a corner in which to sleep until morning. The room is brighter now than the evening outside. Flames dance gently within the great hearth, sending shifting patterns of light across rough timber walls. Shadows lengthen and shrink with every movement of the fire, giving the room the quiet appearance of being alive. You choose a seat where your satchel remains within easy reach. It never leaves your sight. Even while eating, one hand often rests lightly upon its worn leather flap, not from fear alone, but from long-established habit. Responsibility has become so familiar that it continues even when no conscious effort is required. The meal arrives without ceremony. A thick bowl of pottage made from barley, onions, and root vegetables fills the air with a comforting aroma. Beside it rests a coarse loaf of dark bread, still warm enough to soften when broken apart. If fortune smiles, there may be a small portion of cheese or a slice of salted meat, carefully preserved against spoilage. It is humble food. Yet after a full day of walking, it feels remarkably satisfying. You eat slowly, allowing warmth to replace the coolness gathered during hours spent beneath changing skies. Around you, conversations continue in quiet tones. No one raises their voice. There is little need. Travel itself encourages moderation. Those who leave before dawn rarely have the energy for noisy evenings. As darkness settles completely beyond the windows, the room changes again. Travelers who had seemed like strangers only an hour earlier begin sharing pieces of ordinary conversation. One merchant describes flooded roads farther north. A farmer mentions that wolves were heard several nights ago near the edge of a distant forest, though none have approached the village itself. A pilgrim speaks gratefully of a monastery whose brothers offered bread, warm soup, and dry straw after several days of relentless rain. No one tells grand stories. The road has already provided enough experience without embellishment. You listen more than you speak. A messenger quickly learns that quiet attention often proves more useful than constant conversation. Small remarks about damaged bridges or washed-out paths may save several hours tomorrow. A passing comment about a nearby ferry operating only after sunrise may influence your decision about when to leave in the morning. Knowledge travels in many forms, sometimes inside sealed letters, sometimes beside an evening fire. When the meal is finished, you thank the innkeeper and step briefly outside. The village has become wonderfully still. Above you, the night sky stretches across the countryside with astonishing clarity. Far from the smoke and light of great cities, the stars appear countless, scattered across the heavens like grains of salt upon dark cloth. A cool breeze carries the scent of damp earth, distant hayfields, and burning oak from household hearths now hidden behind closed shutters. You breathe deeply. Tomorrow's journey can wait until morning. For now, the road releases its hold upon you. Returning inside, the inn has grown quieter still. Candles burn lower. The merchant carefully wraps his remaining coins inside a cloth pouch before placing it beneath his cloak. The elderly pilgrim has already fallen asleep in his chair, gently awakened only when another traveler kindly guides him toward his sleeping place. There are no private rooms for most guests. Luxury belongs elsewhere. Instead, several travelers share a common sleeping chamber beneath the roof. Straw-filled mattresses lie side by side across the wooden floor, each offering modest comfort rather than true softness. Thick wool blankets help keep away the night's chill, though they carry the unmistakable scent of many previous visitors. You settle carefully onto your allotted place. Before lying down, your evening routine begins once more. The satchel is placed beneath your head, serving both as a pillow and as quiet protection for the letters inside. Your boots are positioned close enough to reach immediately if needed before dawn. The walking staff rests within arm's length against the wall. Everything has its place. Everything will be ready when morning comes. Around you, sleep arrives gradually. Someone sighs deeply before drifting into gentle breathing. Another traveler murmurs briefly while dreaming. The wind brushes softly against the timber walls, while somewhere below, the fire continues its patient work of turning heavy logs into glowing embers. Not every night is spent inside an inn. Many journeys bring you instead to the gates of a monastery after sunset. There the welcome feels different, quieter. The brothers speak softly, leading weary travelers through ancient stone corridors lit by flickering oil lamps. Meals are often taken in near silence, interrupted only by brief prayers of gratitude. Sleeping places remain simple, yet remarkably clean. Thick stone walls hold the warmth of the day's fire, while the peaceful rhythm of monastic life gently settles over every guest. For a messenger, monasteries become more than places of rest. They become dependable islands of order within an unpredictable world. You remember their bells, their gardens, their patient hospitality. Years later, certain roads are recalled not by their distance, but by the monastery that stood halfway along them. As your eyes finally begin to close, another realization quietly forms. You have spent the day trusting the road, now you trust the kindness of strangers. Tomorrow before dawn, both will ask for your faith once again, and without much thought, you already know that you will rise, tighten the familiar strap across your shoulder, thank your hosts, and step back onto the waiting road with the same calm determination that has carried countless messengers before you. When people imagine the life of a medieval messenger, they often picture the road itself. They think of winding paths, distant villages, and long miles disappearing beneath worn boots. Yet after enough journeys, you begin to understand something quieter. The road is only half of your companion. The weather walks beside you every single day. Unlike the villages you pass or the travelers you briefly meet, it never truly leaves. It changes its face from morning to evening, from one season to the next, yet it remains a constant presence shaping nearly every decision you make. Sometimes it greets you with gentle sunlight filtering across open fields. At other times it surrounds you with rain so steady that the horizon itself seems to disappear. You cannot argue with it. You cannot hurry it. You can only learn to travel within it. On certain mornings the air feels almost perfect. A cool breeze carries the scent of damp grass and wildflowers across the countryside. The sky is pale blue, interrupted only by slow-moving clouds whose shadows drift lazily over distant hills. Your cloak hangs comfortably from your shoulders, neither too warm nor too light. Birds sing from hedgerows, and even the road beneath your feet seems unusually kind. These are the days that travelers remember with quiet gratitude, not because they are exciting, because they ask so little. The miles pass almost unnoticed. Your breathing settles into an easy rhythm. The weight of your satchel feels lighter than yesterday. You find yourself observing details that difficult weather often hides: a fox slipping silently between tall grasses, butterflies crossing the road ahead of you, sunlight catching countless droplets of dew still clinging to spider webs stretched between low bushes. Even your thoughts seem calmer. A pleasant day allows the mind to wander gently without forgetting its responsibilities. Yet such mornings are gifts rather than promises. The medieval countryside has its own way of reminding travelers that comfort rarely lasts forever. Perhaps around midday, while crossing a broad meadow, you notice the breeze changing direction. At first it seems insignificant, then the birds grow quieter. The sunlight loses some of its warmth as clouds slowly gather above distant hills. Nothing dramatic happens. The world simply begins preparing for rain. Experienced messengers rarely wait for the first drop before acting. You have seen enough changing skies to recognize the quiet signs. Without breaking your steady pace, you loosen your satchel just enough to wrap an extra layer of cloth around the letters inside. Wax seals protect parchment only to a point. Moisture finds its way into the smallest opening if given enough time. Next, you fasten your cloak more securely. The movement has become almost instinctive. No hurried gestures, no anxious glances toward the clouds. Only calm preparation. Soon the first raindrops arrive. They are gentle enough at first that each one seems almost accidental. A dark mark appears on the dusty road before fading into the surrounding earth. Another lands upon your sleeve, then another. Within minutes, the rhythm changes completely. Rain settles across the countryside with quiet determination. It taps softly against your hood. It darkens the leather of your boots. It fills wagon ruts with shallow pools that reflect the gray sky above. The road you walked so comfortably an hour ago begins changing beneath your feet. Dust becomes damp soil. Firm ground softens. Grass bends beneath the weight of countless tiny droplets. You shorten your stride without thinking. Slippery ground punishes unnecessary haste. Around you, other travelers make similar adjustments. A farmer guides his cart toward the shelter of nearby trees. Shepherds gather their flocks more closely together. 2 merchants ahead pull heavy woolen cloaks over their shoulders before continuing at a slower pace. Everyone accepts the same truth. The rain belongs to no one, and everyone must live within it. As the rain continues, you gradually stop wishing for it to end. That may sound like surrender, but it is something gentler than that. It is acceptance. There are lessons that the medieval road teaches through repetition alone, and one of the earliest is that frustration consumes energy without changing the weather. The clouds neither hurry nor hesitate because of your plans. They release their rain according to rhythms older than kingdoms and larger than any single traveler. So you continue walking. The steady tapping upon your cloak becomes almost familiar, like another heartbeat accompanying your own. Water gathers along the edges of your hood before falling in slow drops. The leather of your satchel grows darker, though the extra wrapping inside keeps its precious contents dry. Every few miles you instinctively check the fastening, not because you expect failure, because careful habits deserve no exceptions. Soon the road becomes noticeably quieter. Rain changes more than the appearance of the countryside. It changes its sound. The cheerful conversations of passing travelers become shorter. Wagon wheels no longer rattle as sharply over dry stones but move with a heavy, muffled rhythm through soft earth. Birds seek shelter beneath thick branches, leaving long stretches of the journey accompanied only by falling water and the measured pace of your own footsteps. There is an unexpected peace in this silence. Without realizing it, you begin paying closer attention to smaller details. Tiny streams appear beside the road where none existed that morning. Drops collect on the tips of fern leaves before slipping soundlessly onto the forest floor. Moss growing across old stone walls deepens into rich shades of green, while tree trunks darken beneath the gentle soaking rain. The world seems to breathe more slowly. You pass an elderly farmer repairing a section of woven fence despite the weather. He looks up briefly, offers a small nod, and returns to his work without complaint. The gesture stays with you. There is no frustration in his face, only the quiet understanding that the work of life continues, whether skies are blue or gray. That same understanding slowly becomes part of your own profession. By late afternoon, the rain begins to ease, not all at once. First, the steady curtain softens into scattered drops. Then patches of brighter sky appear between retreating clouds. Sunlight returns cautiously, touching the tops of distant hills while the valleys remain wrapped in cool mist. The countryside looks transformed. Every leaf catches the light. Every puddle reflects fragments of the clearing sky. The air carries the clean scent of wet earth, crushed grass, and fresh rainwater flowing gently toward nearby streams. You pause beside a large oak tree and remove your cloak for a few moments. Not to dry it completely, that will take much longer, but to allow fresh air to reach the layers beneath. You examine your boots once again, brushing away clumps of heavy mud with a short stick gathered from the roadside. These small moments of care matter. A neglected boot stiffens as it dries. A damp cloak left folded too long begins to smell of mildew. Even after the rain has passed, the weather continues shaping tomorrow's journey. But rain is only one companion among many. As the seasons slowly turn, new challenges quietly replace the old. Summer arrives with long days that seem generous at first. The roads harden beneath weeks of sunshine, making travel easier than during the muddy months of spring. Yet by midday the heat settles heavily across open fields. The air shimmers above dusty tracks, and your water skin grows lighter with every careful drink. Shade becomes valuable. An ancient oak offers relief. A monastery garden provides cool stone walls beneath climbing vines. Even a narrow woodland path feels wonderfully refreshing after hours beneath an unbroken sky. Autumn brings another rhythm altogether. The mornings arrive wrapped in silver mist that clings to rivers and low meadows long after sunrise. Fallen leaves soften the roads, hiding stones beneath carpets of gold and brown. Farmers fill wagons with grain and apples before winter arrives, making many roads busier than at any other time of year. The countryside seems full of quiet industry. Everyone prepares. You prepare as well. Then winter slowly claims the landscape. The first frost appears almost unnoticed, tracing delicate white patterns across grass before dawn. Your breath hangs visibly in the cold air. Leather stiffens overnight. Streams freeze around their quiet edges, while distant hills disappear beneath thin blankets of snow. Walking changes again. Each step requires greater care. Frozen mud becomes uneven beneath your boots, and icy patches hide beneath freshly fallen snow. Journeys grow shorter because daylight fades quickly, encouraging every traveler to seek shelter well before darkness settles across the land. Yet even winter offers unexpected kindness. The frozen ground sometimes supports wagons more easily than autumn mud ever could. Cold air remains wonderfully clear, allowing church towers and distant villages to appear from many miles away. The silence after fresh snowfall carries a peaceful quality unlike any other season. You begin to understand that every kind of weather asks for something different. Rain asks for patience. Heat asks for restraint. Wind asks for balance. Snow asks for caution. None of them asks for complaint. Years pass almost without your noticing, and eventually you no longer think of pleasant or unpleasant weather in quite the same way. Instead, each day simply presents another set of conditions through which the message must safely travel. The destination remains unchanged. Only the journey varies. Perhaps this quiet acceptance becomes one of the greatest strengths of a medieval messenger. You cannot command the skies, but you can prepare for them. You cannot prevent storms, yet you can protect the letter beneath your cloak. You cannot stop winter from arriving, but you can begin your walk before dawn and end it before darkness closes the road. And so, as evening settles once again across fields still shining with the memory of rain, you continue forward with calm determination. The weather walks beside you, sometimes as a friend, sometimes as a difficult companion, always as a teacher. After enough journeys, you begin to notice something curious. Although you spend your life carrying other people's news, very little of it truly belongs to you. The letters tucked safely inside your satchel, the carefully remembered conversations repeating quietly in your thoughts, the sealed agreements tied with cord and wax, they all pass through your hands for a short while before continuing into someone else's life. You are their guardian, never their owner. This is not always an easy distinction to keep. Imagine arriving at the gates of a prosperous market town after 3 days on the road. Your boots are coated with layers of dried mud collected from different villages. Your cloak bears the faint scent of wood smoke from several roadside fires. The familiar weight of your satchel has become almost invisible through habit. Yet today you know that inside rests a letter awaited with unusual anticipation. You do not know every word written upon the parchment. You are not meant to. The wax seal remains unbroken. Its purpose is not merely to keep the parchment closed, but to reassure the receiver that no curious hands have interfered during the journey. When the merchant finally accepts it, his eyes linger upon the seal before he says anything at all. Only after recognizing it does he smile. His expression changes before the letter is even opened. You realize that sometimes hope arrives before information itself. There are moments when you witness small scenes like this many times in a single season. A father receives news that his son has safely reached another town. A monastery welcomes word that requested manuscripts are finally ready to be copied. A village reeve learns that the next market has been postponed because flooding has damaged a bridge many miles away. You stand quietly while these moments unfold. Sometimes gratitude follows, sometimes relief, occasionally disappointment. Whatever emotion appears belongs to the people before you, not to you. That quiet separation protects the messenger in ways that are not immediately obvious. If you celebrated every joyful letter as though it were your own, your heart would grow restless. If you carried every sorrow home each evening, the road would eventually become too heavy to walk. Instead, you learn a gentler balance. You care deeply enough to complete your task faithfully, yet lightly enough to continue when the next journey begins. This balance requires discipline. not the loud discipline of soldiers drilling in castle courtyards, a quieter kind. The discipline of listening without interrupting, of remembering without altering, of delivering without judging. It becomes especially important because not every message brings comfort. One autumn afternoon, you may carry notice that additional taxes will be collected after the harvest. The village receiving the announcement welcomes you politely, yet the atmosphere changes almost immediately once the steward begins reading the official words aloud. The room grows quieter. Faces become thoughtful. Some people lower their eyes toward the floor. Others stare silently into the fire. No one blames you. They understand that you did not create the message. You merely carried it. Still, you remain respectful. You never rush away simply because the news is difficult, nor do you linger unnecessarily. You wait until questions that concern the journey itself have been answered. Then, when your duty is complete, you shoulder your satchel once again and quietly continue toward the next destination. There are other days when your arrival is greeted with unmistakable joy. A marriage agreement finally reaches two families after weeks of careful negotiation. A shipment of valuable cloth has arrived safely despite dangerous weather. A long-absent relative sends word that he intends to return before winter. Smiles spread quickly. Children are called indoors to hear the news. Neighbors gather. Laughter fills rooms that had been silent only moments before. You witness these scenes from the edge rather than the center, almost like someone standing in the doorway of another person's life. For a brief moment, you are present. Then you continue walking. It is a curious existence. You become part of countless important memories while remaining absent from nearly all of them. As the seasons continue their slow procession, you begin to understand that the messenger's greatest skill is not simply reaching a destination. It is remaining steady while the emotions of others rise and fall around you. There are mornings when you leave a manor carrying a carefully folded invitation to a wedding feast. The wax seal bears the emblem of a noble household, pressed neatly into deep red wax while it was still warm. The steward hands it to you with quiet satisfaction, knowing that months of discussion have finally led to an agreement between two families. 2 days later, you place that same letter into waiting hands. The courtyard feels brighter than when you arrived. Servants hurry from one building to another with renewed purpose. Smiles appear before the parchment is even unfolded. Somewhere inside the hall, preparations begin almost immediately. Your task, however, is already finished. You offer a respectful nod. You accept the cup of water for the road. Then you continue onward before the celebration has truly begun. You carry happiness to its destination. You do not remain to enjoy it. Other journeys unfold very differently. A local reeve may entrust you with a notice from the lord of the manor announcing that additional grain must be collected before winter. No voices are raised when you arrive, yet the mood changes all the same. Farmers listen carefully while the announcement is read aloud. They exchange thoughtful glances, quietly calculating how much grain will remain for their own households after the obligation has been fulfilled. You observe without offering opinions. The decision was never yours. The message belongs to the sender. Its consequences belong to those who receive it. Your responsibility lies only in ensuring that the words arrive exactly as intended. This careful distance protects more than your peace of mind. It protects your reputation. If a messenger were known for changing messages, adding personal thoughts, or softening unpleasant news, trust would disappear quickly. The road depends upon certainty. People must believe that the words arriving in your care are the same words that left another person's lips or were sealed inside another person's letter. That certainty is your true profession. Not walking, not writing, not even delivering. Trust itself. Because of this, you develop habits that seem almost invisible to others. When someone dictates a spoken message, you repeat it back slowly before beginning your journey. If several names are mentioned, you quietly arrange them in your memory according to familiar places or faces. If instructions contain several steps, you rehearse them while the road is still fresh beneath your boots. You never assume that memory alone is enough. You strengthen it through repetition. During long stretches of quiet walking, you may find yourself softly speaking the same sentence again and again beneath your breath. not loudly enough for passing travelers to hear, only enough to keep each word resting safely in your mind. The rhythm becomes strangely comforting, almost like the steady pace of your footsteps. Steppins, step, sentence, step, sentence. Both continue together for mile after mile. Occasionally, someone attempts to learn more than they should. At a roadside inn, another traveler may notice the quality of a wax seal protruding slightly from your satchel and ask whether it belongs to a great lord. A merchant sharing your evening meal may wonder aloud whether trade in the next town has improved. A curious child might ask if you have visited the king's castle or seen distant cities beyond the hills. Most questions are innocent. Some are not. Experience teaches you to answer kindly without revealing what has been entrusted to your care. You speak of the weather. You mention the condition of the roads. You describe a beautiful monastery garden or an unusually sturdy stone bridge. The conversation remains pleasant while the message remains protected. In time, people begin recognizing this quiet discretion. Merchants appreciate it. Monks respect it. Village elders rely upon it. Even those who never meet you personally may hear that there is a messenger whose words can be trusted, because they are never more and never less than the message itself. There is a certain loneliness within that reputation. You know fragments of countless lives. You recognize family names from villages scattered across the countryside. You remember which monastery requested fresh parchment each autumn. You know which merchant always pays fairly, and which ferryman insists upon exact coins before allowing anyone aboard. Yet few people know much about you. They know your face, perhaps your name. They know that you arrive unexpected and leave before lingering too long. Your own story remains largely untold. It becomes woven quietly into the stories of others instead. Years later, a child may remember the day important news arrived, but forget the person who carried it. A merchant recalls the agreement that changed his fortunes, but not the tired boots that brought the letter. A monastery carefully preserves the parchment while the messenger's name slowly fades from memory. Surprisingly, this troubles you less than an outsider might imagine. Recognition has never been the purpose of the journey. Completion has. There is a quiet satisfaction in knowing that villages remain connected because someone keeps walking. Markets continue because agreements arrive. Families remain informed because letters survive long roads, uncertain weather, and changing seasons. History often remembers rulers who issued commands. It remembers battles that altered borders. It remembers magnificent churches and castles built over generations. Far less often does it remember the ordinary people who carried the instructions, agreements, invitations, prayers, and promises between them. Yet without those patient travelers, many of history's greatest moments would have remained trapped within the walls where they first began. So as the evening light softens into gold and another destination slowly appears beyond the next bend in the road, you tighten the familiar strap across your shoulder once more. Inside your satchel rests another message. It is not yours. It never will be. Your task is simply to carry it faithfully until someone else's waiting hands gently lift it from your own. And tomorrow, when another message takes its place, the quiet rhythm of your life will begin again. There comes a time when you stop thinking of yourself as someone who travels. Instead, you become someone who simply walks. The difference is difficult to notice at first. During your earliest journeys, every mile demanded your full attention. You wondered how much farther the next village might be. You counted the hours until you could rest beside a fire. You noticed every ache in your feet and every pull across your shoulders. Now those same sensations remain, but they have become familiar. Like the ticking of a clock in a quiet room, they fade gently into the background of your awareness. Your body has begun to learn the road. This is not because the journeys have become easier. The hills remain where they have always stood. The rivers still follow their winding courses. The weather continues changing without asking your permission. What is changed is you. The first sign is found in your feet. When you first accepted the work of a messenger, your boots felt stiff and unfamiliar after long days of walking. Small stones hidden beneath the road seemed to find every tender place. Even a short stretch of uneven ground could leave your legs feeling unusually heavy by evening. Months later, those same roads no longer surprise you. The leather has softened, gradually shaping itself around your feet until boots and travelers seem almost made for one another. The soles bear the marks of countless miles, their edges worn smooth by earth, stone, and timber bridges crossed in every season. Your feet have changed as well. The skin has grown stronger. Calluses now protect places that once blistered easily. You no longer think about every individual step. Instead, your stride settles naturally into a rhythm that asks for neither speed nor effort. It simply continues. There is something almost comforting about this steady movement. The gentle creak of leather accompanies each step. The familiar weight of your satchel shifts slightly with every change in the road. Your walking staff touches the earth with quiet regularity whenever the path grows uncertain. Together, these small sounds become the music of ordinary days. After enough journeys, even the weight you carry begins to feel different. The satchel itself has not become lighter. If anything, years of careful repairs have added a little more leather to strengthen worn places. Yet your shoulders no longer protest as they once did. The muscles across your back have slowly adapted to their daily work, growing stronger not through sudden effort but through countless ordinary mornings beginning before sunrise. Strength arrives quietly, much like trust, much like experience. You begin noticing similar changes in your hands. They spend less time gripping tools than those of a carpenter or blacksmith, yet they tell their own story. Fingers become rough from tightening leather straps, adjusting cloaks against the wind, climbing steep river banks and lifting heavy satchels filled with parchment, wax tablets, and small parcels. Fine lines of dirt settle permanently into the creases of your skin, despite careful washing whenever the opportunity arises. They are not signs of neglect. They are signs of work honestly repeated. The road leaves its mark upon everyone who walks it long enough. Your face changes too, though you rarely think about it. Summer sunlight darkens your skin. Winter winds leave your cheeks rough. The cool air of countless dawns teaches your eyes to narrow instinctively against bright horizons, while long evenings spent watching fading daylight help you judge the remaining hours almost without conscious thought. You become remarkably skilled at reading the sky, not through written knowledge, through observation repeated over years. A certain pattern of cloud suggests afternoon rain. A particular stillness in the air hints that mist will gather by morning. The changing flight of birds sometimes tells you as much about tomorrow's weather as the heavens themselves. These lessons are never spoken inside classrooms. They belong entirely to the road, and slowly, almost without realizing it, you become one of its most attentive students. As the years continue to unfold, another change takes place that is less visible than stronger legs or weathered boots. Your sense of time begins to change. When you first became a messenger, every destination seemed distant. You wondered how many hours remained before reaching the next village, or whether sunset would arrive before you found shelter. The road felt divided into long stretches that demanded patience simply because they seemed endless. Now you rarely ask how far remains. Instead, your body answers before your thoughts do. Without looking toward the sky for very long, you know that morning is nearly half spent, because the warmth has begun reaching your shoulders. You notice the length of the shadows beside hedgerows, and understand that it is time to begin thinking about the evening's lodging. You hear the church bell of a familiar monastery echoing across the valley and instinctively adjust your pace, knowing that you will reach its gate shortly before the brothers gather for evening prayer. Time has become part of the landscape. It no longer feels separate from it. This quiet understanding changes the way you eat as well. You have learned through experience that a messenger cannot wait until hunger becomes overwhelming. If you do, your strength fades more quickly than you expect. Instead, you stop briefly beside a stream or beneath the wide branches of an old oak, removing a small piece of bread from your satchel before continuing onward. The meal is simple: a crust of rye bread, a slice of hard cheese, perhaps a handful of dried apples saved from the previous autumn. Sometimes there is only bread. Even then, it is enough. You eat slowly not because the food is abundant, but because careful chewing stretches modest provisions into satisfying meals. Nearby, birds continue their quiet songs, and the breeze carries the scent of wild herbs growing along the edge of the road. These pauses rarely last long. The road has taught you the value of brief rest rather than prolonged idleness. Sit too long after many hours of walking, and your legs become reluctant companions when it is time to stand again. Continue without any pause at all, however, and fatigue settles more deeply than necessary. Experience teaches balance. The same balance shapes your pace. You no longer hurry to make up lost time. A younger messenger might quicken every step after a delayed ferry crossing or a muddy stretch of road. You have learned that such efforts often create greater weariness before the day is over. Better to arrive steadily than to exhaust yourself before reaching tomorrow. The road rewards consistency, not bursts of determination. Your breathing reflects this wisdom. Long ago, steep hills left you slightly breathless. Now your lungs have quietly adapted to the work asked of them. You shorten your stride on climbs without conscious thought. You lengthen it again on gentle descents. There is no struggle in these adjustments, only habit. Even your eyes begin noticing details that others overlook. You recognize fresh hoofprints pressed into soft earth and understand that riders passed not long ago. You see broken reeds beside a shallow stream and know that someone recently crossed there with livestock. A faint trail of smoke beyond distant trees tells you that another village lies just beyond the next rise. The countryside gradually becomes a book written without letters. Every path, every stone, every tree, every changing season adds another page. Perhaps the greatest lesson your body learns is not endurance itself, but moderation. There are days when the weather feels unusually pleasant and your legs unusually strong. You could walk faster. You choose not to. There are mornings when excitement urges you toward the next destination. You gently resist it. There are afternoons when weariness suggests sitting for longer than necessary. Again, you choose balance. Little by little, you understand that the messenger who reaches old age is rarely the strongest. More often, it is the one who has learned to conserve strength. You begin noticing older travelers differently. An elderly pilgrim walking with a smooth ash staff may cover fewer miles in a day than a young merchant, yet he arrives each evening with enough energy to continue tomorrow. A seasoned drover guiding cattle across several counties never appears hurried, though his animals reach market reliably every season. They teach without speaking. You observe. You remember. You quietly adopt the same habits. There are mornings when stiffness greets you before your first step. The previous day's miles still linger in your legs, especially after long climbs or difficult weather. You stretch your shoulders, adjust your satchel, and begin walking anyway. Something remarkable happens. Within the first mile, the stiffness begins fading. By the second, your familiar rhythm has returned. The body seems to remember what it was made to do. This becomes one of the quiet comforts of your profession. Not every day feels easy. Almost none of them do. Yet the act of beginning often proves more difficult than the act of continuing. As the afternoon light turns warmer and another village slowly comes into view beyond fields of barley swaying gently in the breeze, you notice that your footsteps still sound much the same as they did many years ago. Steady, measured, patient. The road has shaped your muscles, your habits, your judgment, and even your understanding of time. But perhaps its greatest gift has been teaching you that endurance is rarely built through extraordinary effort. Instead, it grows from thousands of ordinary choices. One careful step, one thoughtful pause, one modest meal, one early morning, repeated so many times that they quietly become the foundation of an entire life. And without realizing it, you have become exactly the sort of traveler the road was always preparing you to be. One of the greatest misunderstandings about medieval travel is that danger always arrived dramatically. Modern stories often fill the roads with desperate outlaws waiting behind every tree, swords drawn and voices raised. They imagine every forest as a place of constant threat and every lonely path as the beginning of an adventure. The truth was usually quieter, far more ordinary. The dangers that shaped a messenger's life were often the ones that made almost no sound at all. You learn this gradually. No single journey teaches the lesson. Instead, dozens of ordinary days slowly reveal that the greatest enemy is often not a person waiting beside the road. It is exhaustion. There comes an afternoon when your legs feel unusually heavy, despite the distance being no greater than yesterday. The weather has been pleasant. The road has remained firm beneath your boots. Nothing obvious explains the weariness settling into your body, yet it is there. You recognize it because you have felt it before. This is not the sharp ache of injury. It is the slow dullness that creeps into your thoughts after many consecutive days of travel. Your attention wanders more easily. You find yourself staring at distant hills without truly seeing them. Even small decisions require a little more effort than they did that morning. Experienced messengers respect this feeling. They do not ignore it. When your body grows tired, your judgment often follows. A misturn along a familiar road may add several unnecessary miles before sunset. A loose stone hidden beneath fallen leaves becomes easier to overlook. A shallow stream that normally presents no difficulty suddenly deserves greater care. Fatigue changes the traveler long before it changes the journey. Because of this, you begin noticing your own thoughts almost as carefully as you watch the road itself. If your attention begins drifting too far, you pause. Not for long. Perhaps only enough time to drink cool water from a nearby spring. Perhaps only enough to remove your satchel for a few quiet moments while stretching stiff shoulders. These pauses seem insignificant, yet they prevent far greater difficulties later. The medieval road rewards those who understand their limits. Another quiet danger arrives through familiarity. There are paths you have walked so many times that you begin believing you know every bend, every bridge, every old oak standing beside the lane. Familiarity creates comfort. Comfort sometimes invites carelessness. One autumn morning you approach a small wooden bridge crossed dozens of times before. Nothing appears unusual from a distance. The stream flows peacefully beneath weathered timbers, exactly as it always has. Only when you step closer do you notice that one support beam has shifted after recent flooding. The bridge still stands, but not as securely as last season. Had you crossed without looking, the result might have been painful. Instead you stop. You examine the structure carefully. Finding another place to cross requires extra time, but not unnecessary risk. The road quietly reminds you that nothing remains unchanged forever, not even places you believe you know by heart. Weather contributes its own silent hazards. Morning mist drifting across open meadows can hide ditches only a few steps away. A layer of fresh snow smooths the landscape so completely that paths almost disappear beneath it. Heavy rain conceals deep wagon ruts beneath muddy water, making each step slightly more uncertain than the last. None of these things appears frightening. Together they ask for constant attention. That attention becomes another form of endurance, not only for your body, for your mind. Hour after hour, mile after mile, you continue observing, listening, adjusting. The work of staying aware never truly ends. As your years upon the road increase, you discover that awareness is not something you possess once and forever. It is something you renew every day. Each sunrise asks for fresh attention. Yesterday's careful habits cannot watch today's road for you. You learn this one cool morning while following a narrow lane, bordered by thick hedgerows. The path is familiar, and for several peaceful miles nothing seems different. Sparrows dart between branches. A light breeze carries the scent of damp earth after an evening shower. The sky is clear enough to promise a pleasant day. It would be easy to let your thoughts wander. Instead, your eyes remain quietly alert. Just ahead, fresh hoof prints cut across the road. There is nothing alarming about them. Travelers have always shared these paths, but beside the prints you notice churned mud and broken branches that were not there the last time you passed. Perhaps a heavily loaded wagon slipped while climbing the gentle rise. Perhaps a team of oxen struggled through after yesterday's rain. Whatever happened, the ground beneath your feet has changed. You slow your pace almost without thinking. A few moments later, you find the cause. Part of the road has collapsed into a shallow ditch where water has slowly washed away the supporting earth beneath it. From a distance it appeared perfectly ordinary. Only close observation revealed the danger before your next step found empty ground. You walk around it quietly. No frustration. No triumph. only another reminder that patience protects more faithfully than confidence alone. As the day continues, another challenge arrives, not from the road, from silence. There are long stretches of countryside where you may not see another traveler for several hours. No carts creak along the lane. No shepherd calls to distant sheep. Even the birds seem content to keep their songs hidden beneath thick woodland branches. For some people, such solitude feels unsettling. For a messenger, it becomes familiar. Still, familiarity does not entirely remove its weight. Without conversation, your own thoughts become your companions. Memories of earlier journeys drift gently through your mind. You recall the welcoming warmth of a monastery visited several winters ago, the laughter heard inside a market square during harvest season, or the quiet face of an elderly ferryman who seemed to know every traveler by sight. These reflections are pleasant, yet you do not allow them to carry you too far from the present. A messenger who walks while daydreaming soon discovers that the countryside rarely announces its changes aloud. A low branch may hang across the path after a recent storm. Loose stones may gather where a hillside has slowly crumbled. Even grazing cattle wandering through an open gate deserve calm attention rather than surprise. The road continues asking for your eyes as much as your feet. Sometimes the greatest danger is simply misjudging the remaining daylight. On clear summer evenings, the warm golden light lingers so beautifully that it becomes tempting to believe there is still plenty of time. Shadows stretch gradually across the fields, softening every hill and hedgerow until the countryside appears wrapped in quiet amber. Then, almost unnoticed, the sun slips below the horizon. Twilight arrives. The familiar road changes immediately. Colors fade. Landmarks become uncertain shapes. Small paths branching away from the main road seem strangely unfamiliar. Experienced messengers avoid allowing the day to reach this point whenever possible. You begin searching for shelter while daylight still remains generous. Not because you fear darkness itself, because darkness asks too much of tired eyes. The same caution applies during winter. A thin layer of frost covering the road at sunrise looks beautiful from a distance. Every blade of grass sparkles beneath the first light. Bare branches shimmer with delicate crystals that seem almost too fragile to survive the morning. Beauty, however, does not always announce safety. Frozen earth becomes unexpectedly hard beneath your boots. Wooden bridges grow slippery. Stone steps leading toward monastery gates demand slower footing than they did the previous afternoon. You discover that beauty and caution often walk together. Years of travel also teach you something about people. Most strangers you meet are ordinary men and women concerned with their own work, their own families, and their own destinations. A shepherd asks about the condition of distant grazing land. A merchant wonders whether tomorrow's market appears busy. Children wave cheerfully as you pass their village. These quiet encounters greatly outnumber moments of suspicion. Even so, wisdom encourages gentle caution. You do not display valuable letters unnecessarily. You avoid speaking loudly about important destinations while resting beside unfamiliar companions. You choose sleeping places with care, preferring respected inns or monasteries whenever they are within reach. None of these habits grows from fear. They grow from experience. Experience rarely shouts. It whispers. Another year passes, then another. You begin noticing that the quiet dangers no longer occupy your thoughts in the way they once did. Not because they have disappeared, because careful habits now meet them almost automatically. Your feet test uncertain ground before trusting it. Your eyes study distant weather before clouds arrive overhead. Your mind quietly counts the remaining daylight without needing constant reminders. Preparation has become instinct. Perhaps that is the greatest transformation the road offers. It does not remove uncertainty from your life. It teaches you how to live comfortably beside it. As evening approaches once again, you stand for a brief moment upon a gentle rise overlooking the road stretching toward another distant village. Smoke rises peacefully from cottage chimneys. A church bell echoes faintly across the valley. Somewhere ahead, another night's shelter patiently waits. Behind you lie countless miles. Ahead, countless more. Between them stands only one traveler who has slowly learned that survival on the medieval road rarely depended upon remarkable courage. Far more often it depended upon quiet observation, careful preparation, and the humble wisdom of taking one thoughtful step at a time. After many years, you stop measuring your life by calendars. Very few people in the medieval countryside think often about numbered years in the way modern people do. A village priest may record dates carefully. A monastery keeps orderly chronicles. Royal clerks preserve official documents. But for someone who spends most of life upon the road, time is remembered differently. You remember it through journeys. You think back to the spring when the northern bridge was rebuilt after the flood carried the old one away. You remember the harsh winter when snow lay beside the roads long after Easter. You recall the autumn when every orchard seemed heavy with apples, and farmers smiled despite the long hours of harvest. The passing years become woven into the land itself. One delivery leads quietly into another. A single season rarely feels important while you are living through it. Only later do you realize how many ordinary days have quietly become a lifetime. There is one route you know especially well. It carries you between a prosperous market town and a peaceful monastery resting several miles beyond a broad river. The distance never changes, yet no two journeys along it are exactly alike. In spring the river runs fast with melting snow from distant hills. Its waters press firmly against the stone bridge, carrying broken branches downstream in slow procession. The surrounding fields glow with fresh green shoots, while lambs stumble uncertainly beside their mothers in nearby pastures. The countryside feels newly awakened. You walk beneath skies washed clean by frequent rain, breathing cool air filled with the scent of wet earth and young leaves. Several months later, summer quietly transforms the same road. The river slows. Wildflowers line the edges of the lane in scattered patches of blue, yellow, and white. Farmers work from sunrise until the fading evening light, cutting hay with long, sweeping motions while children gather the drying grass into neat stacks. The journey feels longer in the afternoon heat. Dust settles across your boots. The leather strap of your satchel grows warm beneath the steady sun. Yet there is a peaceful rhythm to these bright days. Every village seems alive with ordinary work. Then autumn arrives almost unnoticed. One morning you realize that the leaves overhead have begun changing color. The fields once bright with grain now stand mostly empty, their harvest safely gathered into barns before winter can claim it. Wagons loaded with sacks of barley or oats move steadily toward market, filling the roads with quiet industry. The air itself feels different. Cooler, sharper. Wood smoke drifts across the countryside during the evening, reminding every traveler that colder nights are approaching. You pull your cloak a little closer around your shoulders before dawn. Without thinking, your pace changes slightly, not faster, simply more deliberate. Winter eventually follows. The familiar road becomes almost another place entirely. Hedgerows disappear beneath frost. Stone walls stand white along the fields. The branches of great oaks stretch black against pale skies, stripped of every leaf that shaded you during summer. Yet even now, the journey continues. Messages still require carrying. Villages still wait. Monasteries still ring their bells. The seasons may change the appearance of the countryside. They do not change your purpose. Perhaps this is why the years seem to pass so quietly. Every season asks for different clothing, different caution, different expectations. But each morning begins in remarkably similar fashion. You wait before dawn. You check your satchel. You tighten your boots. You step onto another waiting road. The repetition is gentle, never empty. It slowly shapes your memory until entire years become associated not with dates but with the countless deliveries that quietly filled them. With each passing year, you begin to notice that the countryside remembers you almost as faithfully as you remember it, not because the roads themselves can think, but because the people along them slowly become familiar faces. The baker in one village no longer asks who you are. Instead, he greets you with a quiet smile while sliding another loaf into the warmth of his oven. The ferryman reaches for the rope before you even speak, already recognizing the worn satchel resting against your shoulder. At the monastery gate, one of the older brothers nods gently as he opens the heavy oak door, remembering that you almost always arrive shortly before evening prayers. These small recognitions never become grand friendships. The road seldom allows that. You rarely remain anywhere long enough to become woven fully into the daily life of a single community. Instead, your life becomes scattered across dozens of places. A familiar greeting here, a remembered face there, a shared cup of warm broth on a cold evening before another early departure at dawn. The connections are brief, yet over the years they become quietly meaningful. Children reveal the passing of time more clearly than anything else. On your earliest journeys through one particular village, a small boy watched curiously from behind his mother's skirts whenever travelers appeared. He seemed fascinated by your satchel, your boots, and the long wooden staff polished smooth by years of use. Several summers later, the same child no longer hides. He waves confidently as you pass. Eventually, he helps his father repair a stone wall beside the road, pausing only long enough to offer a cheerful greeting before returning to his work. Still later, you notice him walking beside a cart of his own, leading a sturdy horse toward the weekly market. You never witness these changes all at once, only a little at a time. The road teaches patience even in watching people grow. The buildings change as well. A wooden bridge that once groaned beneath every wagon is replaced by carefully laid stone. A new mill appears beside a river where only open grassland stood before. A chapel receives a taller bell tower, its sound carrying farther across the surrounding fields than it did years ago. None of these changes feel sudden. You simply notice them during one ordinary journey after another. History often arrives quietly. You begin remembering entire periods of your life through these familiar landmarks. There was the year the old oak finally fell during a winter storm. That was before the monastery built its new guest house. I first met that merchant when the bridge was still made of timber. Your memories arrange themselves according to places rather than numbers. The road becomes your calendar. Its landmarks become your chapters. There are seasons when the same route must be traveled again and again. Perhaps trade between two towns has grown especially busy, or a monastery exchanges frequent letters with neighboring abbeys. At first, repetition might seem dull to someone standing outside your profession. It rarely feels that way to you. The countryside never presents itself in exactly the same manner twice. Morning mist drifts differently across the valley. Birdsong changes with the months. The smell of freshly cut hay replaces the fragrance of spring blossoms, only to give way later to damp fallen leaves, and finally the crisp stillness of winter air. Even silence has its seasons. Summer mornings begin with countless birds greeting the dawn. Winter mornings often greet you with almost complete quiet, broken only by the crunch of frost beneath your boots. Both become equally familiar. Both become equally welcome. As the years gather behind you, another realization slowly takes shape. Your own life has become remarkably simple, not empty, simply clear. You own little compared to wealthy merchants or noble households. A dependable cloak, strong boots, a walking staff, a well-maintained satchel, a few small personal belongings carried from place to place. Yet these modest possessions have served faithfully through countless miles. You begin caring for them almost as carefully as the messages themselves. A loose stitch is repaired before it fails completely. Leather is rubbed with oil whenever the opportunity arises. The wooden staff receives a fresh smoothing with a knife after becoming rough from constant use. These quiet acts of maintenance become another rhythm marking the passing seasons. Nothing is replaced carelessly. Everything earns its place through long service. Perhaps this is another lesson the road quietly offers. It teaches you to value what endures, not because it is expensive, because it is dependable. A trusted pair of boots becomes more valuable than a finely embroidered cloak unsuited to travel. A familiar inn offering honest shelter becomes more precious than a grand hall where strangers are viewed with suspicion. Steady habits become more useful than sudden bursts of energy. As another autumn evening settles gently across the countryside, you find yourself walking the familiar path toward a monastery, whose bells you have heard through so many different seasons that you no longer count them. The leaves beneath your feet whisper softly with each measured step. Smoke rises peacefully from distant cottages. A flock of geese crosses the fading sky, beginning its long journey toward warmer lands. You watch them for a moment before continuing. They too measure the year through travel. Their route is written into memory. Yours has become written into the roads of fields, forests, villages, bridges, monasteries, and quiet country lanes that have shaped your life one delivery at a time. Without ever intending it, you have become part of the landscape itself, not because statues will remember you, not because chronicles will record your name, but because somewhere beyond the next hill, another familiar face is already expecting the steady footsteps of the messenger who always seems to arrive, season after season, with the quiet reliability of the turning year. There is a curious truth about history. Most people remember the individuals who made decisions. Far fewer remember the people who carried those decisions from one place to another. A king may issue a decree, a bishop may write an important letter, a merchant may negotiate an agreement that changes the fortunes of an entire town. Yet none of these words possesses much power while resting upon a table. Someone must lift them. Someone must protect them from rain, mud, river crossings, and long miles of uncertain roads. Someone must place them safely into waiting hands. Very often, that someone is you. You rarely know the full importance of what rests inside your satchel. The wax seal tells you that the letter matters. The careful instructions given before departure suggest urgency or significance. But the wider story usually remains hidden. That is simply the nature of your profession. Imagine leaving a castle shortly after sunrise. The steward places a carefully folded parchment into your keeping, reminding you only that it must reach a monastery before the third evening bell. He offers no explanation beyond that. You bow respectfully. You tighten the satchel strap across your shoulder. Then you begin walking. For the next 3 days the journey resembles countless others. You cross familiar streams. You shelter briefly from afternoon rain beneath broad oak branches. You sleep one night in a modest roadside inn and another within the guest house of a monastery whose stone walls have welcomed travelers for generations. Nothing about the road suggests that this journey differs from those before it. The letter remains silent. When you finally arrive, the monks greet you with calm gratitude. The abbot examines the wax seal carefully before breaking it. His expression changes ever so slightly while reading, not dramatically, just enough for you to notice. Soon another monk is summoned, then another. Several quiet conversations follow behind closed wooden doors while you wait patiently in the courtyard beside a small herb garden filled with rosemary, sage, and lavender. You never learn the complete contents of the message. Perhaps it concerned the copying of valuable manuscripts. Perhaps it settled a disagreement over land. Perhaps it announced the arrival of scholars or requested assistance during a difficult season. Whatever the reason, the journey quietly influenced events that would continue long after you resumed your own travels. This happens more often than you realize. History moves through ordinary moments before anyone recognizes them as important. A merchant receives permission to establish a new market. A bridge is ordered repaired after repeated flooding. A monastery begins constructing a larger library because additional manuscripts have been promised. None of these changes appears overnight. Each begins with words, and words require travelers. Sometimes you wonder how many lives have been quietly connected through your footsteps alone, not by intention, simply through faithful work repeated day after day. A young apprentice receives permission to begin training in another town. A physician is summoned before illness spreads through a village. A family separated by many miles learns that loved ones remain safe after a difficult winter. These are not grand victories celebrated by chroniclers, yet for the people living them, they become unforgettable moments. You witness only the beginning or the end, rarely both. Still, there is quiet satisfaction in knowing that your steady pace allows distant communities to remain connected. The road becomes more than a path between places. It becomes the thread that gently stitches those places together. As the years continue, you begin to notice that the road carries more than messages. It carries consequences. A single folded sheet of parchment weighs almost nothing in your satchel. You can lift it with 2 fingers. A light breeze might carry it across a courtyard if it were left unattended. Yet the ideas written upon it may influence hundreds of people who never see the messenger who delivered it. That quiet contrast never entirely leaves your thoughts. One spring morning you arrive at a riverside town where masons have already begun gathering blocks of freshly cut stone. Oxen pull heavy wagons through muddy streets, while craftsmen examine wooden scaffolding rising beside the old bridge. You remember crossing that bridge many times. You also remember the floods that weakened it year after year. Months earlier you had delivered correspondence between local officials and the lord responsible for maintaining the crossing. At the time, it seemed like another ordinary journey. Now, watching workers patiently rebuilding the structure, you realize that somewhere among those exchanged letters had been the decision that allowed this work to begin. No one recognizes you. No one points toward the messenger and says he carried the order. Nor should they. The bridge belongs to the people who planned it, funded it, and built it. Still, you cannot help feeling a quiet satisfaction. Your footsteps formed one small link in a much longer chain. You continue your journey without mentioning it. That is often how the messenger's contribution remains. Present, essential, almost invisible. The same pattern repeats itself throughout your life. You deliver requests for additional grain to monasteries preparing for difficult winters. You carry agreements allowing neighboring villages to share pasture during seasons of drought. You transport carefully copied manuscripts from one abbey to another, so knowledge can continue spreading long after the original pages begin to fade with age. Each journey appears ordinary while it is happening. Only later do its effects become visible. Sometimes they remain invisible forever. You learn to accept that as well. Not every seed planted beside the road grows while you are there to witness it. Many grow quietly after you have already walked on. This understanding changes the way you think about importance. In youth, it is easy to imagine that meaningful work must always appear dramatic. Years upon the road teach something different. The greatest changes often begin with patient repetition. One careful delivery, another, then another. Letters carried faithfully over months become relationships between towns. Those relationships become regular trade. Trade supports families. Families raise children. Children inherit communities strengthened by countless quiet acts that no single person remembers completely. History rarely moves in sudden leaps. More often it advances through thousands of dependable days. Your profession simply allows you to see a little more of that gradual movement than most. By now your hair has begun showing threads of gray beneath your hood. The leather of your satchel bears patches where careful repairs have replaced worn sections. Your walking staff has grown smooth enough to shine where your hand naturally rests. The road has changed you just as surely as time has changed the countryside. New bridges stand where ferries once operated. Young trees planted beside monasteries now cast generous shade across their gardens. Children who once waved excitedly from cottage doorways have become parents greeting you with the same familiar kindness. Everything changes. Everything continues. Occasionally, during quiet evenings beside an inn's hearth, younger travelers ask how long you have served as a messenger. You smile gently before answering. Not because the question is amusing, because you honestly find it difficult to measure. Do you count the years, the miles, the seasons, the countless letters that have rested inside your satchel? Eventually you simply answer, long enough to know that the road always has another lesson. It is enough. The younger travelers often nod thoughtfully before returning to their meals. Perhaps one or two of them will remember those words many years later while walking beneath their own heavy satchels. Perhaps not. Either possibility feels acceptable. The road never insists upon being remembered. It simply continues. As another evening settles across the countryside, you leave a small market town behind and follow a familiar lane climbing gently toward higher ground. The setting sun spreads soft amber light across harvested fields. A flock of sheep gathers quietly near a stone wall, while their shepherd prepares for the night. Far away, a monastery bell marks the close of another ordinary day. You pause for only a moment. From this hilltop, the roads seem almost endless. Some disappear into forests. Others cross rivers before vanishing behind distant hills. Each carries people with hopes, worries, promises, questions, and decisions that must somehow reach another place. For generations before you, other messengers walked these same paths. For generations after you, others will continue. Very few names will survive, the work itself will. And perhaps that is enough, to know that while rulers issued commands and scholars filled libraries with careful writing, there were also ordinary travelers who rose before dawn, tightened worn leather straps across tired shoulders, and quietly connected one corner of the medieval world to another, without applause, without monuments, without expecting either, only with patient footsteps and faithful hands. There comes a morning when you notice the change before your feet even touch the floor. The room is quiet, just as it has been on hundreds of other mornings. The embers in the hearth still glow softly beneath a blanket of pale ash. Outside, the village remains asleep beneath the last moments of night. Nothing around you seems different, yet your body greets the day with a little more hesitation. Your knees feel stiff after yesterday's long walk. Your shoulders take a few moments longer to loosen beneath the familiar weight of your cloak. The leather satchel waiting beside the door has not grown heavier. You have simply grown older. It happens so gradually that no single journey announces it. One season slips into another. Another harvest passes. Another winter leaves its pale mark upon the countryside. Without ever deciding to, you have become one of the older travelers whom younger messengers quietly watch with respectful curiosity. Years ago, you admired men and women who seemed able to judge weather by the smell of the wind alone. Now you notice younger companions glancing toward the sky only after first observing your expression. Experience has become visible, not through grand speeches, through ordinary confidence. You tighten the strap of your satchel exactly as you always have. The movement is slower. It is also smoother. There is no wasted effort. Every buckle finds its place almost without looking. Every knot is tied by hands that have repeated the same motion thousands of times. The road has polished your habits as surely as it polished the handle of your walking staff. You leave before dawn as always. Some routines remain unchanged regardless of age. The eastern sky slowly brightens while you pass quiet cottages whose occupants will not awaken for another hour. Smoke has not yet begun rising from their chimneys. Dew covers every blade of grass, sparkling faintly whenever the first pale light touches the fields. You breathe deeply. The cool air fills your lungs with the familiar scent of damp earth and distant woodland. For a brief moment it feels exactly like every other morning you have ever walked this road. Then a small climb reminds you otherwise. The hill is one you have crossed countless times. Years earlier you barely noticed it. Today you shorten your stride almost immediately. Not because the climb has become steeper, because wisdom now replaces youthful determination. You understand something that younger travels often learn, only through experience. The road is not conquered by strength. It is completed through patience. Halfway up the slope, you pause beside an old boundary stone. Long ago, you might have viewed such a pause as unnecessary. Now you understand its value. You remove your satchel for a moment, stretching your shoulders while listening to the countryside awakening around you. A blackbird begins singing from the hedge nearby. Somewhere across the valley, the distant bell of a monastery marks the beginning of morning prayers. Nothing urges you to hurry. The message will arrive more safely if you care for the messenger carrying it. This simple truth grows clearer with every passing year. As you continue walking, memories quietly accompany your footsteps. There is the bend where you once waited nearly half a day for flood waters to fall before crossing. There is the oak beneath which you shared bread with a pilgrim who had walked all the way from another kingdom. There is the meadow where a frightened colt escaped its owner, sending half the village laughing through tall summer grass before it was gently caught again. The countryside has become filled with quiet memories, each one tied to an ordinary place. You realize that the landscape itself has become something like an old friend, not because it never changes, because you have changed together. As the morning stretches gently toward midday, you discover that age has changed more than the strength in your legs. It has changed the way you look at the people around you. Years ago, when another messenger approached from the opposite direction, your first thoughts often centered on the condition of the road ahead. Was the bridge still passable? Had yesterday's rain turned the valley into mud? Was the inn beyond the next village already full? Those questions still matter. But now you find yourself noticing the traveler instead. A young courier adjusts his satchel again and again because the strap has not yet settled comfortably across his shoulder. Another walks too quickly during the cool hours of the morning, unaware that such enthusiasm will become weariness long before evening. A third pauses to examine a map with a furrowed brow, still believing that every uncertainty can be solved by careful study alone. You remember those days, not with embarrassment, with quiet affection. There was a time when you hurried because every destination felt urgent. There was a time when you believed a few extra miles before sunset were always worth the effort. The road patiently taught you otherwise. Sometimes the younger travelers ask questions, not because you appear important, because you appear dependable. Is the ford safe after yesterday's rain? Which monastery gives shelter during winter? How far is the next village? You answer simply. You describe the road as it truly is. You recommend the stone bridge instead of the shallow crossing, if heavy rain has fallen. You mention the old inn whose hearth burns through the night. You remind them to refill their water before climbing the long ridge where no springs can be found. You never pretend to know everything. The road dislikes certainty, spoken too confidently. Instead, you offer experience. Experience leaves room for tomorrow to be different. These brief conversations become one of the quiet pleasures of later years. You begin recognizing that the knowledge you once received from older travelers has slowly become your own to share. No ceremony marks this change. No one announces it. One day you are the listener. Another day, almost without noticing, you have become the one answering. The afternoon passes beneath a sky brushed with slow-moving clouds. Your pace remains measured. There is no reason for haste. You already know where you intend to spend the night. A familiar monastery lies several miles ahead, its stone walls visible only after the road bends around a broad hillside. Years ago, reaching it before sunset felt like an achievement. Now it feels more like greeting an old acquaintance. When the gate finally comes into view, one of the brothers smiles before you even speak. His beard has become noticeably whiter since your earliest visits. Perhaps yours has as well. You exchange the same quiet greetings you have exchanged for many seasons. No lengthy explanations are necessary. He already knows where travelers leave muddy boots. You already know where fresh water waits in the courtyard. Some friendships are built through frequent conversation. Others are built through years of familiar routine. As evening approaches, you sit for a while beneath the monastery's covered walkway, overlooking a small herb garden. Lavender sways gently in the cooling breeze. Bees drift lazily among flowering plants before returning to their hives. The last warmth of the day lingers within the ancient stone walls. A novice quietly waters the garden nearby. He moves carefully, still learning the rhythm of monastic life. Watching him reminds you of yourself many years ago. Every calling begins with uncertainty. Every profession slowly shapes those willing to remain patient. You wonder how many times you have rested in this very place. Perhaps dozens, perhaps hundreds. The exact number no longer matters. What matters is the feeling of peaceful familiarity that settles over you as naturally as the evening light. Later, after sharing a simple meal of bread, vegetable broth, and a little cheese with the brothers, you prepare once more for sleep. Your routine has changed very little, despite the passing decades. The satchel rests beneath your head. Your boots stand within easy reach. Your cloak dries quietly beside the fading fire. Outside, the monastery bell rings one final time, before silence gradually settles across the valley. You lie awake for a few moments longer than you once did, not because sleep refuses to come, because memories arrive gently before it. You remember roads now hidden beneath forests that have slowly reclaimed abandoned paths. You remember ferrymen, whose sons now guide the boats instead. You remember villages that have grown larger, children who have become elders, and fellow travelers whose footsteps no longer accompany yours upon the road. There is sadness within those memories, but it is a quiet sadness, the kind carried with gratitude rather than regret. Nothing remains unchanged. Not kingdoms, not seasons, not travelers. The road has taught you this lesson so often that you no longer resist it. Instead, you accept each change as calmly as you once accepted rain, snow, or the coming of another dawn. Tomorrow you will rise once again. Your joints may protest for a few moments. Your shoulders may require a little more time before settling beneath a familiar leather strap. Even so, when you step beyond the monastery gate, your feet will still find the road almost instinctively, because after so many years it is difficult to know whether you have been walking the road, or whether the road has quietly been carrying you all along. There is no single day when the road tells you that it is time to stop. It offers no farewell, no final milestone carved into stone, no gathering of travelers waiting to congratulate the messenger who has spent a lifetime walking between distant places. Instead, the realization arrives slowly, much as every other lesson has. One ordinary morning you finish a familiar journey and notice that you are less eager to begin the next. Not because you no longer love the road, because you have finally learned everything it wished to teach. Your satchel still rests comfortably against your shoulder. Its leather has darkened over many years of rain, sunshine, smoke, and careful repair. Each stitch tells a story of another season survived. The brass buckle no longer shines brightly, worn smooth by hands that have opened and closed it thousands of times. It has become something more than a tool. It has become a companion. You understand now why older craftsmen keep their favorite hammer long after a newer one could replace it. Certain objects quietly collect the years. The same is true of your walking staff. The smooth place where your hand naturally rests has been polished by countless miles. Tiny marks remain from rocky climbs, icy riverbanks, and accidental knocks against monastery gates and stone bridges. You could carve a new one in a single afternoon. It would never feel the same. The road has shaped both of you together. As you continue your journey, you begin noticing small things that younger messengers rarely pause to observe. Morning sunlight filtering through the branches of an ancient oak, the patient sound of a mill wheel turning beside a quiet stream, swallows darting beneath the eaves of a village barn before autumn carries them south once again. These sights have always been there. Only now do you linger with them a little longer, perhaps because you sense they have accompanied you more faithfully than you ever realized. The villages themselves feel different as well, not because they have changed dramatically, because your relationship with them has changed. There was once excitement in arriving somewhere new. Now there is comfort in returning somewhere familiar. You know which cottage keeps bees behind its garden wall. You know where the blacksmith hangs horseshoes outside his workshop to cool after the forge is quieted. You know which stretch of road fills first with blue wild flowers, when spring finally returns after a long winter. The countryside has become a collection of quiet greetings. Even those who do not know your name often recognize your face. A baker lifts his hand in welcome while sweeping flour from his apron. Children pause their games to watch you pass, just as their parents once did many years earlier. An old shepherd nods gently from across the hillside, saying nothing because nothing more is needed. Recognition has become enough. You no longer feel like a visitor, nor entirely like a resident. You belong to the roads between places. It is an unusual kind of home, one without walls, one measured not by ownership but by familiarity, and perhaps that is the greatest gift the road has quietly given you. It has shown you that a person may belong somewhere, even while always moving through it. As another gentle evening settles across the countryside, you begin to understand that ending a life's work is not the same as abandoning it. The road will continue whether you walk it or not. Tomorrow another messenger will tighten a fresh leather strap across younger shoulders. Another pair of boots will leave new prints in the morning dew. Another careful hand will protect letters from rain beneath a woolen cloak, while crossing hills, rivers, and forests that have watched generations come and go. The work never belonged to one traveler. You were simply entrusted with it for a little while. That realization brings an unexpected peace. There is no sadness in knowing that others will continue the journey. In truth, you have spent your entire life making certain that messages reached the next pair of waiting hands. Why should the work itself be any different? You find yourself walking a familiar route one last time before winter. The road curves gently beside harvested fields where stubble glows pale beneath the fading afternoon light. The air smells faintly of wood smoke, drifting from distant cottages where evening meals are already being prepared. Nothing about the landscape announces that this journey is different. Only you know. Your pace is slower than it once was, yet there is no feeling of being left behind. Instead, every step seems to carry quiet gratitude. You pass the old stone bridge rebuilt many years ago. Moss now softens the edges of its weathered blocks. The river beneath it continues flowing with the same patient determination it always has. Water never keeps its shape, yet the river remains. You smile gently at the thought. Perhaps a life is much the same. The days pass, the seasons pass. The traveler changes, but the purpose quietly continues. Near sunset, you reach a hill overlooking several roads stretching toward distant villages. You have stood here many times before, usually thinking only about tomorrow's destination. This evening you simply watch. A farmer guides 2 oxen toward home. Smoke rises from a monastery kitchen. A wagon creaks steadily along the western road while its horses lower their heads against the cool breeze. Far beyond them, another small figure walks alone with a satchel over one shoulder. You cannot see the person's face, only the steady rhythm of their footsteps. For a brief moment, it feels as though you are looking backward through time. Then you realize you are looking forward instead. The road has already found its next messenger. You continue walking until the bells of a familiar monastery welcome the evening. The brothers greet you warmly, just as they have done for so many years. There is fresh bread, a bowl of vegetable stew, a place beside the fire where your boots can dry before morning. Nothing extraordinary happens. That seems perfectly fitting. A lifetime built from ordinary days deserves an ordinary ending. Later, before sleep, you rest your hand upon the worn leather satchel one final time. The stitching has been repaired countless times. The buckle bears scratches gathered from bridges, gatehouses, ferry rails, and monastery doors. It has carried decrees, invitations, prayers, contracts, family letters, merchant accounts, and simple notes asking after loved ones many miles away. Through it all, it asked only one thing: that you carry faithfully. You believe you have. Outside, the night grows still. A faint wind moves through bare branches. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls once before silence gently returns. You close your eyes knowing that tomorrow someone else will wake before dawn, check a satchel much like yours, tighten worn boots, and quietly begin another journey across the sleeping countryside. The road has never belonged to one pair of feet, only to those willing to keep walking. For a little while longer, remain where you are. There is no need to hurry away from the medieval road. The messenger has reached the end of another quiet day, and perhaps after following these winding paths together, you have begun to notice something that is easy to overlook in both history and modern life. The world rarely changes all at once. It changes through countless ordinary acts, repeated with patience. A messenger rises before dawn. A monk lights a candle before beginning another page of careful copying. A miller opens the water gate that turns the wheel for another day's work. A shepherd leads sheep toward familiar pasture. A baker kneads another loaf before the village awakens. None of these moments seems remarkable while it is happening, yet together they become history. The medieval world depended not only upon kings, queens, knights, or famous battles. It depended upon people whose names were seldom written into chronicles. People who repaired bridges before they collapsed. People who harvested grain before winter arrived. People who carried letters from one valley to the next without expecting thanks. Perhaps that is why the messenger's life feels so quietly familiar. Even today, much of the world still depends upon unseen hands. Someone drives through the night while others sleep. Someone repairs a road before sunrise. Someone sorts parcels, answers messages, maintains machines, or keeps watch while entire towns rest peacefully behind closed doors. The work changes. The quiet devotion remains. As you think back over the long miles we have shared tonight, perhaps you can still hear the gentle rhythm of steady footsteps upon packed earth, the soft creak of worn leather, the distant ringing of monastery bells drifting across cool evening air, the crackle of a small fire beside a roadside inn, the rustle of wind moving through autumn leaves above an old country lane. These sounds have accompanied travelers for centuries. They ask for nothing except a willingness to slow down and listen. The messenger never sought fame. He measured success differently. A letter delivered without damage, a promise safely carried, a worried family finally receiving welcome news, a bridge crossed before darkness, a warm meal shared after a difficult day's walk. Small victories, quiet victories, the sort that disappear almost immediately after they are completed, leaving only the gentle certainty that the work was done well. There is something deeply comforting about that thought. Not every meaningful life needs to be extraordinary. Sometimes it is enough simply to be dependable, to keep walking, to keep showing up, to carry what has been entrusted to you with care before placing it gently into someone else's waiting hands. Outside the world of history, your own evening is likely much quieter than the medieval roads we have explored together. Perhaps you are resting beneath a warm blanket instead of a heavy wool cloak. Perhaps the only sound around you is the quiet hum of your home rather than a distant call of an owl across dark fields. Perhaps tomorrow will ask something entirely different of you than it asked of a medieval messenger. Even so, the feeling of steady patience remains timeless. If your eyes have grown heavy, you may allow them to close. If your breathing has become slower, there is no need to change it. The road no longer asks anything of you tonight. The final message has been delivered. The satchel has been set gently beside the fire. The boots have been removed. Beyond the monastery walls, the countryside settles into silence beneath a sky filled with quiet stars. Somewhere far away, another traveler begins tomorrow's journey, but not yet. For now, even the road is resting. Thank you for spending this peaceful evening with Sleepy Historian. If you found comfort in these quiet journeys through the past, you are always welcome to return whenever you need another slow walk through history. Until then, may your own road be gentle, your burdens light, and your rest deep beneath the calm, unhurried night. Sleep well.